The Great Rift had torn reality asunder, spilling madness across a million worlds. In the 41st Millennium, humanity clung to existence through faith in a rotting god corpse and the barrels of 1 billion guns. Hope was heresy, mercy was weakness, and into this nightmare galaxy, where there was only war, fell a god who still believed in both. Thor Odinson plummeted through storms that defied physics and sanity. The Bifrost had shattered mid-transit, cosmic energies colliding with something that screamed in colors that had no names. Mjolnir blazed in his grip as the Imperium, that roiling sea of souls and nightmares humanity called the Warp, clawed at his essence. Things with too many eyes and mouths that spoke in backwards, time shrieked at him through the maelstrom. His Asgardian nature, divine and ancient, repelled the worst of them. But even gods could drown in this ocean of madness. He crashed into reality like a meteor strike. The world beneath him burned. Thor pulled himself from the crater, armor scorched, every nerve ablaze with pain that shouldn't have been possible for one of his kind. Above, the sky writhed purple and red, warp storms that violated the natural order. The air tasted of copper and rot. Around him stretched a cityscape of towering Gothic architecture, cathedrals the size of mountains, festooned with skulls and eagles, statues of warriors in elaborate armor, and everywhere the iconography of a two-headed Aquila. This was not Midgard. This was not any realm he knew. "What realm is this?" Thor muttered, rising to his feet. Lightning crackled across Mjolnir's head, responding to his distress. The hammer hummed strangely, as if the very laws of this universe resisted its enchantments. Then he heard the screaming. Thor's warrior instincts took over. He launched skyward, Mjolnir pulling him toward the source. What he found froze even his battle-hardened heart. Horrors poured through tears in reality itself, creatures of living nightmare with flesh that shifted like wax, demon things with too many limbs and weapons of screaming metal. They fell upon civilians fleeing through streets already choked with corpses. Men in crude armor and tattered uniforms fired weapons that spat laser beams, their faces twisted in terror and fanatical determination. Officers in peaked caps executed those who ran, screaming about the Emperor's will. Monsters plague this world, and its defenders execute their own? Thor's voice was thunder itself. "Not while I draw breath." He descended like divine judgment. Lightning erupted from Mjolnir in a devastating arc that vaporized a dozen demons in an instant. The lesser demons of Sinch shrieked as their immaterial forms were blasted back into the warp. Thor landed among the Imperial Guard, hammer spinning, each strike obliterating nightmares that should not exist. A pink horror lunged at a wounded guardsman. Thor's backhand sent it spiraling into oblivion. A screamer dove from above. Mjolnir caught it mid-flight and reduced it to dissipating smoke. The Asgardian fought with the perfection of 10,000 years of warfare, every movement economical, every strike lethal. "Form ranks behind me," Thor roared to the stunned soldiers. "I shall hold this line." The guardsmen stared in shock. Commissar Hendrik, his bolt pistol still smoking from executing a coward, found his voice. "What manner of Xenos?" "I am no alien," Thor bellowed, pulverizing 3 flamers with a single hammer throw. Mjolnir returned to his hand with a crack of displaced air. "I am Thor of Asgard, and these abominations shall feast no more." For 6 hours, Thor held the line. The demons came in waves that would have broken space marine formations. Lightning turned entire hordes to ash. Mjolnir's strikes shook the very foundations of the Hive City. The guardsmen, witnessing what they could only comprehend as divine intervention, rallied. Their lasguns barked in disciplined volleys, following the golden-haired warrior's lead. But Thor saw things that troubled him deeply. The commissars executed nearly as many guardsmen as the demons killed. Officers spoke of billions dead on other worlds as acceptable casualties. When civilians begged for evacuation, they were turned away, resources reserved for strategically valuable personnel. One soldier, weeping over a dead comrade, was shot in the head for weakness endangering unit cohesion. "This is madness," Thor growled, catching a cultist's chain axe on Mjolnir's haft. He hurled the traitor into a building with bone-shattering force. "What manner of kingdom treats its people thus?" "The Imperium of man, stranger," Commissar Hendricks said, approaching cautiously. Blood soaked his uniform. "And we do what we must to survive in a galaxy that wants humanity extinct. Your intervention is noted. But who are you, truly? What are you?" Thor opened his mouth to answer, but the words died as the sky tore open anew. Through the warp rift descended warriors that made even Thor pause, hulking figures in power armor of slate gray and ice blue, each standing over 7 feet tall, their armor adorned with wolf pelts, fangs, and runic totems. They landed with earth-shaking impacts, bolt weapons roaring, chainswords screaming. These were not men. They were weapons given flesh and fury. Space wolves. The Vulca Fenrika. The Emperor's executioners. Their leader, a grizzled warrior with a mechanical eye and frost-encrusted armor, surveyed the scene with predatory intensity. Wolf Lord Sven Bloodhowl had seen much in 3 centuries of service, but this golden-haired warrior wielding lightning like a weapon of the All-Father himself. This was new. "Hold fire," Sven commanded his pack. The Space Wolves formed a loose perimeter, weapons trained on Thor but not yet firing. Around them, the remaining demons fled or dissolved as the wolves' arrival tipped the balance. Thor lowered Mjolnir but did not release it. "I am Thor Odinson of Asgard. I mean no harm to the innocent." "Asgard?" Sven's remaining organic eye narrowed. "No world in Imperial records bears that name. Yet you fight demons with power that reeks of the warp, stranger. Speak plainly. Are you sanctioned psyker, rogue witch, or something far worse?" "I am no witch," Thor said carefully, sensing the threat in the air. These warriors moved like Einherjar, but their eyes held a coldness he'd seen only in the most battle-scarred reavers. "I am lost, cast into this realm by forces I do not fully understand, but I will not stand idle while innocents suffer." If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Sven studied Thor for a long moment, then keyed his Vox. "This is Bloodhowl to strike Cruiser Frostfang. We have a situation. Possible unsanctioned psyker, possibly Xenos, possibly something worse. Demonstrates extreme combat capability and demon-slaying efficiency. Requesting Rune Priest consultation and inquisitorial notification." The response crackled through. "Acknowledged, Wolf Lord. Inquisitor Vasseur is inbound. Containment protocols authorized." Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. "I am no prisoner." "That," Sven said, a wolf's grin splitting his scarred face, "remains to be seen, stranger. You fight well. You kill the archenemy with admirable fury. But in the Imperium of man, good intentions and combat prowess mean nothing if you are tainted." He gestured to the carnage around them. "You held this line when mortal men would have broken. That buys you a conversation before we decide whether to recruit you or execute you." Around them, the surviving guardsmen knelt in the rubble, pressing their foreheads to the ground before the space wolves. Many wept in religious ecstasy at being in the presence of the Emperor's angels. Commissar Hendrik alone remained standing, though his hand trembled on his bolt pistol. Thor looked at the devastation, the corpse-choked streets, the sky still writhing with unnatural light. He thought of Asgard's golden halls, of battles fought with honor, of protecting the realms with pride and joy. This place was a nightmare given form, and he was trapped in it. "Very well," Thor said finally. "I will speak with your leaders. But know this, I bow to no tyrant, and I will not stand by while the innocent are slaughtered." Sven's grin widened. "Then you may not survive long in the Imperium, Golden One. We are all tyrants here. We must be. The alternative is extinction." He turned to his pack. "Secure the perimeter. The Inquisition is coming." As Thunderhawk gunships descended from orbit, their hulls emblazoned with the wolf head symbol of the Space Wolves, Thor felt the weight of destiny settling upon him once more. He had come to this place by accident, cast through cosmic storms into a realm of horror. But Thor Odinson had never fled from a fight. And as the Imperium's machinery of suspicion and control closed around him, he knew the greatest battle of his existence was only beginning. The Space Wolves brought Thor to their fortress monastery aboard the strike cruiser Frostfang, a vessel that dwarfed any ship he'd seen in his travels through the 9 realms. The ship was a flying cathedral of gray steel and ice, its corridors wide enough for 50 men to march abreast, its walls covered in runic wards and wolf pelts from beasts that must have been massive beyond reason. Thor walked unbound but surrounded. 6 space wolves flanked him, their weapons held at ease but ready. Sven Bloodhowl led them through corridors lit by flickering torches and bioluminescent strips, past chapels where warriors prayed to something called the Emperor as Allfather, past armories that would have equipped small armies. "Your weapon," Sven said, glancing at Mjolnir. "It is no common artifact. Our rune priests sense power in it that predates the Imperium itself, enchantments that resist the warp's touch." "Mjolnir was forged in the heart of a dying star," Thor replied, allowing himself a small measure of pride. "It is bound to me by enchantments placed by my father, Odin Allfather. Only those worthy may wield it." Worthiness, Sven tested the word. A dangerous concept. The Imperium judges worthiness by only one measure: service to humanity's survival. Can you meet that standard, Thor of Asgard? Before Thor could answer, they entered a vast chamber that took his breath away. The great hall of the Frostfang was a warrior's paradise. Long tables carved from single trees, trophies of 1,000 campaigns hanging from vaulted ceilings, and at the center, a hololithic display showing a galaxy being slowly consumed by a massive tear in reality itself. Dozens of space wolves filled the hall, many bearing scars that would have killed lesser beings. They paused in their drinking and battle tales to watch Thor pass. Some gripped their weapons, others simply stared with the intensity of apex predators evaluating potential prey. At the far end, upon a throne carved from ice and stone, sat an ancient warrior whose very presence radiated authority. Bjorn Stormwolf, the Wolf Lord of the Great Company, was nearly 4 centuries old. Augmetic implants covered half his face, and his armor was a patchwork of repairs from countless battles. But his eyes, those were sharp as the day he'd been recruited from Fenris's Death Worlds. "Approach," Bjorn commanded. His voice was like grinding glaciers. Thor walked forward without hesitation. He'd stood before the Allfather himself. He would not cower before any warrior, no matter how fearsome. "I am told," Bjorn began, "that you held the line at Hive Secundus for 6 hours, alone, against a demonic incursion that would have required 3 squads of my wolves to contain." He leaned forward. I am also told that you wield lightning like a weapon, that you speak with strange accent and stranger words, and that you know nothing of the Imperium, the Emperor, or the great enemy. I am Thor of Asgard, Thor said firmly, son of Odin, god of thunder, protector of the 9 realms. I was cast into this place by forces beyond my control, but I will not apologize for defending the helpless. God. Bjorn's laugh was harsh. There is only one God Emperor, stranger, and he sits upon the golden throne on Terra, keeping the Astronomicon lit so humanity can navigate the warp. All other gods are either lies or demons. Thor's eyes narrowed. I assure you, I am no demon. Perhaps. A new voice cut through the hall, cold, feminine, and utterly without mercy. But that is precisely what a demon would say. The space wolves parted as a figure entered the great hall. She was tall, slender, wrapped in red and black robes that covered power armor beneath. Her face was half hidden by a Baroque helmet, but her eyes, augmented with targeting optics, fixed on Thor with the intensity of a dissection laser. A power sword hung at her hip, and the symbol of the Inquisition burned on her chest. A stylized eye surrounded by skulls and script. Inquisitor Katarina Vasseur of the Ordo Malleus. Demon Hunter. Witchbreaker. She had served the throne for 70 years, and in that time she had condemned planets to die rather than risk chaos corruption spreading. Inquisitor, Bjorn acknowledged with barely restrained hostility. Space Wolves and Inquisition had an complicated relationship. Your presence was not requested. Yet protocol demands it, Wolf Lord. Vasseur's gaze never left Thor. An entity of unknown origin wielding powers that defy classification appears in the midst of demonic incursion. This is precisely my concern. She circled Thor slowly, examining him like a specimen. Tell me, God, do you know what year it is? I do not use your calendar, Thor replied carefully. It is the 41st Millennium since the birth of our Emperor. Humanity spans 1,000,000 worlds and faces extinction on every front. We are besieged by alien horrors, betrayed by traitors within, and hunted by demons from a dimension of pure madness. We survive only through the Emperor's light and the willingness to make sacrifices that would break lesser species. She stopped in front of him. In this galaxy, stranger, there is no room for unknown variables. You will submit to testing, to psychic scanning, to gene sampling, or you will be executed as a potential threat to humanity's survival. Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. Lightning crackled across his arms. I am no one's test subject. Every space wolf in the hall raised their weapon. Bolt pistols, bolters, plasma guns, enough firepower to level a building, aimed at Thor's heart. Stand down, Bjorn ordered, but his own hand rested on his weapon. Inquisitor, perhaps less. Aggressive negotiations. There is no negotiation with the unknown, Vasseur interrupted. This being could be a warp entity wearing flesh, a Xenos infiltrator, a chaos plot. Until proven otherwise, he is a threat. I have fought your demons, Thor's voice boomed through the hall. I have saved your people, and this is how you repay. We repay nothing, Vasseur cut him off coldly. You performed your duty as any loyal servant of the Emperor would. That earns you a chance to prove your purity, not immunity from scrutiny. She nodded to her retinue. Inquisitorial stormtroopers in crimson carapace armor, carrying hellguns. Submit willingly, and the testing will be painless. Resist, and we will subdue you by force. The hall crackled with tension. Thor's lightning intensified, casting sharp shadows across walls. The Space Wolves' weapons hummed with charge. One word, one movement, and this would become a bloodbath. Then Sven Bloodhowl stepped forward. Wolf Lord, if I may. Bjorn nodded curtly. Sven turned to Thor, and something in his scarred face softened. "Stranger, I understand your pride. We wolves understand pride better than most, but you need to understand what you've stumbled into." He gestured to the hololithic galaxy display. "That tear in reality? We call it the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift. It split our galaxy in two. Entire sectors have fallen to chaos, trillions dead, and it grows worse every day." He pointed to different regions. "Here, the Tyranids, alien swarms that devour entire worlds and leave nothing but barren rock. There, the Necrons, soulless machine warriors who ruled when our species still lived in caves. And everywhere, the ruinous powers, chaos itself, corrupting, mutating, destroying everything humanity has built over 10,000 years." Sven's voice dropped. "The Imperium is not kind, Thor of Asgard. It is not just. It cannot afford to be. We execute billions to save trillions. We burn worlds to stop corruption spreading. We demand absolute faith because doubt is the first step toward damnation." He locked eyes with Thor. "But we do this because the alternative is extinction, not death, worse than death. Eternal torment in the warp, our souls fed to entities that feast on suffering itself." The hall was silent, save for the hum of machines and the crackle of Thor's lightning. "So I ask you, warrior to warrior," Sven continued, "submit to the Inquisitor's testing. Prove your purity. Show us you are not corrupted, not tainted, not a threat. And if you pass, and I believe you will, for no demon could stand the touch of blessed silver I see you wear, then we will speak as brothers. We will teach you of this galaxy, perhaps even fight alongside you." Thor looked around the hall. At the space wolves, warriors who reminded him painfully of his Asgardian companions, fierce, loyal, proud. At the Inquisitor, whose cold calculation masked what he suspected was genuine devotion to protecting her species. At the hololithic display showing a galaxy drowning in nightmares. He thought of Asgard, of honor and glory, of fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. But this was not Asgard. This was something far darker. "Very well," Thor said finally, the lightning fading. "I will submit to your tests, but know this. If you seek to imprison me, to use me as a weapon against my will, I will resist with every ounce of my being." Vasur's expression didn't change. "If you are pure, you have nothing to fear. If you are corrupted—" She let the implication hang. "One more thing," Bjorn added, rising from his throne. "While you are tested, you will be confined to quarters, not as prisoner, but as honored guest under observation. Sven's pack will be your wardens. Cooperate and we'll feed you our finest emyode and meat. Resist, and we'll drag you to the testing chambers in chains." Thor met the Wolf Lord's gaze. "I prefer the memyode." A rumble of laughter rolled through the hall. The tension broke like ice cracking. Bjorn grinned, showing fangs that were definitely not standard human anatomy. "I like this one," the Wolf Lord declared. "He has the heart of a wolf, even if he looks like a damned golden-haired thrall." He turned to Sven. "See him to the guest quarters. Feed him. Show him what it means to drink with the Vilka Fenrika, and in the morning—" His expression hardened. "We discover whether he's truly an ally or just another threat wearing a hero's face." As Thor was led from the hall, escorted by Sven's pack, but no longer at weapon point, he caught glimpses of the ship's interior. Servitors, half-human, half-machine slaves with their minds wiped clean, labored at menial tasks. Cherubs, actual babies with mechanical wings grafted to their corpses, floated through corridors carrying messages. Walls were decorated with skulls, prayers to the Emperor etched in high Gothic, warnings about the price of failure. This Imperium worshipped suffering itself. "You seem troubled," Sven observed as they walked. "I have seen many horrors in my long life," Thor replied quietly, "but I have never seen a civilization that has built its very foundations upon them." "Welcome to the 41st Millennium," Sven said grimly, "where hope is heresy and the only victory is survival." Thor said nothing, but as he was shown to quarters that, while comfortable, were clearly designed to contain dangerous prisoners, he gripped Mjolnir and made a silent vow. He would find a way home. But while he remained in this nightmare galaxy, he would not, could not, abandon those who suffered under its weight, even if that meant standing against the very Imperium that claimed to protect them. The testing began at dawn, though aboard a ship traveling through the warp. Dawn was merely a designation on the chronometer. Thor was escorted by Sven's entire pack, 6 space wolves who watched him with a mix of curiosity and readiness, to a chamber deep in the Frostfang's bowels that reeked of ozone and sanctified oils. Inquisitor Vasseur waited with her retinue and 2 additional figures that made Thor's warrior instincts flare. The first was ancient beyond measure, a wizened space wolf whose armor was covered in runes that hurt to look at directly. His eyes glowed with eldritch light, psychic power barely contained. Rune priest Ulrich Frostbeard, one of the chapter's most powerful psychers. The second figure wore robes of crimson and gold, his face hidden behind a skull-faced mask connected to tubes and wires. Chirurgeon Interrogator Malthios of the Ordo Malleus. He carried instruments of torture disguised as medical equipment. "Stripped to the waist," Vasseur commanded. "We begin with physical examination." Thor complied, setting Mjolnir aside with reluctance. The space wolves tensed. Without his weapon, would he be vulnerable? The hammer rested against the wall, humming softly. Malthius approached with auspex scanners and gene samplers. For 2 hours, he worked in silence, taking blood, tissue, running scans that made Thor's skin crawl. The chirurgeon interrogator's augmetic eyes whirred and clicked, analyzing every cell. "Fascinating," Malthius murmured, his voice distorted by voxcasters. "Cellular structure is humanoid, but reinforced beyond any natural human capability. Bone density is impossible. Musculature generates force comparable to unaugmented Astartes. And yet," he looked up at Vasseur, "no gene seed, no Astartes implants, no signs of chaos mutation or Xenos grafting." "Then what is he?" Vasseur demanded. "Unknown, but not corrupted by conventional measures." Malthius stepped back. "I recommend psychic examination." Ulrich Frostbeard approached, and the air temperature dropped. The rune priest's presence was like standing before an avalanche, immense power held in check by iron will. His staff, carved from the fang of a Fenrisian ice drake, crackled with frost. "Look at me, stranger," Ulrich commanded. Thor met his gaze. The rune priest's psychic consciousness slammed into his mind like a battering ram. Thor gasped as foreign presence tore through his memories. Asgard, Midgard, battles against frost giants and dark elves, the Bifrost's rainbow light, Odin's wisdom, the weight of Mjolnir in his hand. But Thor was no stranger to mental combat. His Asgardian mind, hardened by millennia, pushed back, not with hostility but with unyielding strength. "You may look, Psyker, but you will not control." Ulrich's eyes widened. For 5 minutes they stood locked in psychic contest, power meeting power. Then the rune priest withdrew, breathing heavily. "By Russ and the Allfather," Ulrich whispered, "his soul is clean, impossibly clean. No taint of chaos, no touch of the warp's corruption. His mind is a fortress I could not breach without killing us both." He turned to Vasseur. "This one speaks truth. He is no demon, no corrupted witch. He is something else entirely." Vasseur's expression remained skeptical. "And his powers?" Not psychic in the conventional sense. He doesn't draw from the warp. His power comes from within, like an internal star. Ulrich studied Thor with new respect. I have never encountered such a phenomenon. Untested phenomena are dangerous, Vasseur countered. We cannot simply... Enough! Bjorn Stormwolf's voice boomed through the Vox speakers. The Wolf Lord appeared on a vid screen. I have heard the Rune Priest's assessment. Thor of Asgard has passed the Inquisition's tests. Unless you wish to declare one of my most experienced Rune Priests incompetent Inquisitor, I suggest we move to more practical evaluation. Vasseur's jaw tightened, but she inclined her head. Very well, Wolf Lord. Practical evaluation it is. An hour later, Thor stood in the Frostfang's arena, a massive chamber where space wolves honed their skills through controlled combat. The stands were packed with warriors eager to see the stranger tested. Sven Bloodhowl entered the arena opposite Thor, armed with his frost axe and bolt pistol. The Wolf Guard grinned like a predator. No maiming, no killing. First to yield or incapacitation loses. Fight with honor, stranger, and you'll earn the wolves' respect. Thor hefted Mjolnir, feeling its comfortable weight. I have fought alongside warriors of many realms, Space Wolf. Let us see if your kind measures up. The arena erupted in howls and cheers. Sven moved first, blurring across the arena floor with speed that would have seemed impossible for something in such heavy armor. His frost axe carved toward Thor's ribs, trailing icy vapor. Thor blocked with Mjolnir, and the impact rang like a church bell. He spun, hammer arcing toward Sven's head. The Space Wolf ducked, fired his bolt pistol point blank. Thor twisted, the explosive round missing by inches and detonating against the arena wall. They clashed like titans, Sven's centuries of experience against Thor's millennia. Astartes' enhancement against Asgardian divine might. Each blow could have shattered stone. Each movement was precision honed by endless warfare. Thor feinted high, struck low. Mjolnir caught Sven's knee, buckling the armor. Sven rolled with the impact, came up swinging, his frost axe opening a shallow cut across Thor's shoulder. First blood to the Space Wolf. The crowd roared. Thor grinned through the pain. You are skilled, Fenrisian. And you're tougher than you look, Golden Hair. Sven lunged again. They fought for 20 minutes. Thor gradually adapted to Sven's style, aggressive, pack-oriented tactics versus Thor's more individual warrior approach. Lightning began to crackle along Mjolnir's head as Thor's battle fury rose. Then Sven made a mistake, overcommitted to a killing blow that was too wild, too reckless. Thor sidestepped, brought Mjolnir up in a perfect uppercut that caught the Space Wolf under the chin and lifted him off his feet. Sven crashed to the arena floor, helmet cracked, consciousness flickering. Thor stood over him, hammer raised for the finishing blow. Then he lowered it and extended his hand instead. Well fought, warrior. Sven stared at the offered hand for a moment, then laughed, a deep, genuine sound. He clasped Thor's wrist in the warrior's grip. Well fought indeed. You fight like one of us, stranger, like a true son of Fenris. The arena exploded in cheers. Space wolves howled approval. Even Bjorn, watching from his throne box, nodded with satisfaction. But not everyone was pleased. Inquisitor Vasseur watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She keyed her encrypted vox. This is Vasseur to Inquisitorial Fortress Cryptus. Subject Thor has passed physical and psychic examination. Combat capability confirmed at Astartes, equivalent or higher. No immediate signs of corruption. The response came in a voice like grinding metal. Inquisitor Lord Gaston, her superior. And your recommendation? Vasseur was silent for a long moment. He is dangerous, my lord. Not corrupted, not hostile, but dangerous nonetheless. An unknown element with powers we cannot fully explain. In another age, I would have recommended immediate termination. And now, Vasseur watched Thor being mobbed by space wolves, sharing victory mjod and war stories despite the language barriers. Now we are desperate. The Great Rift bleeds worlds every day. We cannot afford to waste potential assets. If this Thor can kill demons as effectively as reports suggest, we need him. Then bind him to the Imperium's service, Gaston ordered. By faith, by duty, or by necessity, but ensure his loyalty. The alternative is too dangerous. Understood, my lord. Vasseur cut the link. In the arena, Thor had no idea that his fate was being decided by forces beyond the combat circle. He drank with the space wolves, listened to their tales of campaigns across the galaxy, and slowly began to comprehend the true scope of the horror he'd fallen into. Sven, nursing his cracked ribs, leaned close. You fought well, Thor. But fighting demons in an arena is nothing compared to what awaits on real battlefields. The Imperium is not kind to its heroes. It consumes them, uses them up, and discards their corpses without thought. Then why do you serve? Thor asked quietly. Sven's expression grew distant. Because someone must. Because if we don't stand between humanity and the dark, everyone we've ever loved will be torn apart by things that treat souls like playthings. He took a long drink. We don't serve the Imperium because it's good, Thor. We serve because the alternative is extinction. Before Thor could respond, Bjorn's voice echoed through the arena. Thor of Asgard, you have proven your combat prowess, passed the Inquisition's tests, and shown honor in victory. The Vulca Fenrica accept you as probationary battle brother. The space wolves howled approval. You will accompany my great company on our next deployment, Bjorn continued. Valhalla sector burns under World Eater's assault. Billions of Imperial Guard hold the line against Khorne's champions. We deploy in 6 hours. His gaze hardened. There you will face your true test. Not controlled combat, but war in its purest, most horrific form. Survive that, and you will have earned our full trust. Thor stood, Mjolnir at his side, feeling the weight of destiny settling upon him once more. He had passed their tests, proven his worth. But as he looked at the hololithic displays showing Valhalla sector, worlds burning, Imperial Guard casualties in the billions, Chaos Space Marines rampaging through population centers, Thor realized that proving his worth to the Space Wolves was only the beginning. The true test would be whether he could maintain his honor, his values, his very soul in a galaxy that seemed designed to destroy all three. I will fight, Thor said firmly, for those who cannot fight for themselves. Bjorn's expression was unreadable. In the Imperium, Thor of Asgard, sometimes those who cannot fight for themselves are the ones we must sacrifice for the greater good. He stood. 6 hours. Use them to prepare. Valhalla awaits. As the space wolves filed out, already discussing tactics and deployment, Thor remained alone in the arena. Lightning crackled softly across Mjolnir's head, responding to his troubled thoughts. He had wanted to be a hero, to fight monsters and protect the innocent. But in the 41st Millennium, what if the greatest monsters wore human faces? What if protecting the innocent meant making choices that would shame him for eternity? Thunder rumbled through the Frostfang's corridors, echoing Thor's turmoil. The storm was only beginning. The deployment to Valhalla sector shattered whatever idealism Thor had carried from Asgard's golden halls. The Thunderhawk gunship descended through atmospheric fire toward Valhalla Primus, and through the viewport, Thor witnessed hell given planetary form. Cities burned for hundreds of miles, Corpses formed literal mountains where world eaters had stacked their kills in tribute to Khorne. The sky rained blood, actual blood, summoned by chaos sorcery to demoralize the defenders. And across the scorched plains, billions of Imperial Guard held trench lines that stretched beyond the horizon, firing laser guns at traitor space marines who should not have been able to die but somehow kept coming. "Emperor's mercy," Thor whispered, then realized that in this universe, mercy was likely heresy. Sven Bloodhowl, seated across from him in full battle plate, checked his bolt pistol. "This is a minor engagement by Imperium standards. Last year, Cadia fell. Trillions died when their planet broke. This," he gestured to the burning world below, "this is just another Tuesday." The Thunderhawk landed in a forward command post, hastily erected ferrocrete bunkers surrounding a towering cathedral fortress. Lord General Kozlov commanded from the cathedral's strategium, a haggard man whose uniform bore the stains of 3 weeks without sleep. When the space wolves entered, every officer fell to their knees in religious ecstasy. "Rise," Bjorn Stormwolf commanded, his voice cutting through their prayers. "Report." Kozlov struggled to his feet, aged beyond his years by the horrors he'd witnessed. "My lords, we hold 700 kilometers of trench line with 2 billion guard. Daily casualties, 30 million. The World Eaters assault 3 times daily. They're wearing power armor made from our dead." His voice cracked. "They use corpses as weapons." Thor felt his stomach turn. "Your men have held against such nightmares for weeks." Kozlov looked at Thor as if seeing him for the first time. "Who?" "An ally," Bjorn said curtly. "Continue your report." "The World Eaters are led by Khorne, the betrayer himself," Kozlov continued, and even speaking the name made several officers make warding signs. 8,000 traitor Astartes, supported by hundreds of thousands of Khornate cultists. They seek to turn this entire sector into a monument to the Blood God. "Reinforcements?" Sven asked. 3 more Imperial Guard regiments arrive in 2 weeks, if we last that long." Kozlov's eyes were hollow. "Yesterday, the World Eaters broke through our eastern line. I had to authorize Exterminatus Protocol for Hive City Secundus. 15 billion civilians, burned them rather than let chaos claim them." Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir so hard the leather grip creaked. "You killed 15 billion of your own people?" "Yes." Kozlov met his gaze without flinching. "Because if Khorne had taken that hive, he would have corrupted them, turned them into demon hosts, used their souls to open warp rifts that would have doomed the entire sector. I killed 15 billion to save 40 billion. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I will carry their screams to my grave, but I would do it again." Silence filled the strategium. Outside, artillery fire thundered like drums. "The World Eaters attack again at dawn," Bjorn said finally. "We'll take the center line, Thor." He turned to the Asgardian. "You wanted to protect the innocent. Here is your chance. Those guardsmen in the trenches are our innocent. They cannot stand against Khorne's chosen. But with us fighting alongside them, they might survive another day." Thor looked at the tactical displays. The numbers were incomprehensible. Billions fighting, millions dying daily, individual lives reduced to statistics on a data slate. "I will fight," Thor said quietly, but the certainty in his voice had wavered. They deployed to the trenches an hour before dawn. The Imperial Guard stationed there, the Valhallan 104th Regiment, were grim-faced warriors wrapped in greatcoats against the blood rain. Their laser guns clutched with the desperation of men who knew they were already dead. Thor stood among them, towering over the baseline humans, and realized with sudden clarity how truly fragile they were. One swing from a Chaos Space Marine's chainsword would bisect 3 of these soldiers. One bolter round could kill a dozen. These were not warriors. These were sacrifices. "Why do you fight?" Thor asked a young guardsman, barely old enough to shave, whose lasgun shook in his hands. The boy looked up at the golden-haired giant with something like religious awe. "Because the Emperor wills it, Lord. Because if we don't stand here, the ruinous powers will come for my family on Valhalla Secundus. Because," his voice broke, "because someone has to." Thor thought of the warriors of Asgard, each one capable of fighting for days without tiring. These humans lasted mere hours before exhaustion or death claimed them, and yet they stood. "What is your name, soldier?" "Private Mikkel, Lord. Forgive me, but are you an angel? Have you come from the Emperor's side?" Thor started to correct him, then stopped. What would the truth accomplish? That he was from another universe entirely. That their emperor might be as mythical as these people believed Thor's own father to be. "I am a warrior," Thor said instead, "and I will stand with you." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Then we cannot fail." Dawn came like a wound opening. The blood rain intensified, and across no man's land, war horns bellowed with such rage that several guardsmen's ears ruptured from the sound alone. Thor saw them coming, world eaters in crimson power armor decorated with skulls and brass, chainswords revving, bolters barking. But these were not warriors. These were murder incarnate. Each world eater had been implanted with devices called butcher's nails, archaeotech that turned off their capacity for anything except rage. They felt no fear, no mercy, no thought beyond kill, kill, kill. "Blood for the blood god!" The roar came from 8,000 throats simultaneously. "For the Emperor!" the guardsmen responded, and their lasgun volleys lit the dawn. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with thrown stones. The World Eaters crashed into the trench lines like a crimson tsunami. Thor saw a single traitor Astartes catch a lasgun volley that would have vaporized a normal human, and laugh as his armor absorbed the hits. The World Eater's chainsword bisected 6 guardsmen in a single sweep. His bolter fired into packed ranks, each explosive round killing multiple soldiers. Private Mikkel fired his lasgun until the power pack was empty, then drew his combat knife, a pitiful 4-inch blade against a 9-foot-tall monster in power armor. The World Eater backhanded him, and Mikkel's body flew 30 feet to crumple against the trench wall. "No!" Thor launched himself forward, Mjolnir blazing with lightning. His hammer caught the World Eater in the chest, and the impact was like 2 meteors colliding. The traitor Astartes flew backward, armor crumpled, ribcage shattered. But there were hundreds more. Thor fought like never before. Mjolnir became a blur of silver and blue light, each strike felling another corrupted warrior. Lightning arced from his body, chain grounding through World Eaters until their armor overloaded. He was fury made flesh, a storm given purpose, but even gods have limits. A Chaos champion, his armor black with dried blood, swung a chain axe that Thor barely blocked. The weapons locked and the champion leaned close enough that Thor could smell the rot on his breath. "You fight well, Golden One. Khorne would welcome you. Infinite battle, endless glory. No more pretense of mercy or justice, just pure, honest war." "I am no servant of your blood god," Thor snarled, breaking the lock and smashing Mjolnir into the champion's helmet. The traitor's head pulped, but his body stood for 3 more seconds before collapsing. Around him, the space wolves were equally engaged. Bjorn fought with the fury of ancient winter storms, his frost blade turning world eaters into frozen statues before shattering them. Sven led his pack in coordinated strikes, their tactics turning individual advantage into pack supremacy. But the Imperial Guard, the Guard died in droves. Thor watched as an entire platoon was overrun, watched as Commissar executed a soldier for trying to retreat, watched as a medic trying to save a wounded guardsman was torn apart, and the other medics simply stepped over his corpse to reach the next patient. This wasn't war. This was industrialized slaughter. The battle raged for 6 hours. When the World Eaters finally withdrew, not defeated, merely satisfied with the day's blood toll, Thor stood among carnage that defied description. 15,000 Imperial Guard lay dead or dying. The World Eaters had lost perhaps 50 warriors, a crushing Pyrrhic failure by Asgardian standards, a stunning victory by Imperial measures. "Acceptable losses," Lord General Kozlov reported over Vox. "The line holds." Thor found Private Mikkel in a medic tent. The boy had survived, barely. His left arm was gone, his ribs shattered, but he lived. When he saw Thor, his remaining hand made the sign of the Aquila. "We won," Mikkel whispered through pain-suppressant haze. "The Emperor protects." Thor wanted to rage, wanted to scream that this wasn't victory, that a civilization that measured success in millions dead was insane. But looking into Mikkel's eyes, seeing genuine faith and pride despite the horror, Thor understood something terrible. This was their normal. This was every day in the Imperium. And these people, these fragile, broken, faithful humans, had endured 10,000 years of this nightmare because they had no choice. That night, in a forward command bunker, Thor sat with Sven and several other space wolves. They shared recaf, bitter synthetic coffee, and compared battle tales. "You fought well," Bjorn said, entering with his characteristic directness. 73 confirmed World Eater kills. "Your lightning tactics are effective." 73 warriors dead and 15,000 innocents with them, Thor said bitterly. "This is your idea of success." "It is reality," Bjorn replied without anger. "Tomorrow we fight again. The day after, again. For months, years, decades if necessary. This is war as the Imperium fights it. Not glorious, not heroic, just necessary." "How do you bear it?" Thor asked quietly. "How do you witness such suffering and not break?" Sven answered, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries. "Because if we break, if we stop fighting, the suffering becomes infinite. At least this way, some survive." Outside, the blood rain continued to fall. And somewhere in the darkness, Karn the Betrayer sharpened his weapons and laughed at the galaxy's suffering. Thor gripped Mjolnir and knew that his true test was still to come. Not a test of strength or skill, but of soul. Could he maintain his honor in a place where honor was measured in acceptable casualties? Could he be a hero in a galaxy that devoured heroes and spat out their bones? The thunder that rumbled through Thor's heart had no answer, only the promise of more war to come. The war for Valhalla Primus ground on for 3 weeks, and with each passing day, Thor felt something within him changing. Not corruption. Ulrich had tested him twice more, finding his soul still unmarred by chaos. But something perhaps more insidious. Acceptance. He had learned to ignore the screams of dying guardsmen, to step over corpses without pause, to calculate acceptable losses in his strategic planning. The transformation horrified him even as he recognized its necessity. In Asgard, every warrior's death was mourned, celebrated, remembered. Here, billions died and were recorded only as statistics in the Administratum's endless ledgers. On the 22nd day, during a lull in the fighting, Thor stood atop the cathedral fortress's highest spire, watching the endless trench lines stretch to the horizon. Lightning played across his fingertips, not from anger now, but from something colder. Control. Efficiency. "You are adapting," a voice said behind him. Not Sven or Bjorn, but Inquisitor Vasseur. She had remained with the deployment, observing, always observing. "That troubles you." "I am becoming what this place demands," Thor replied without turning. "A killer of such efficiency that I no longer feel the weight of each death." "Good." Vasseur stepped beside him, her augmetic eyes scanning the horizon. "Guilt is a luxury in the 41st Millennium. Survival requires harder men than those who weep over necessary evils." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Thor's voice held no accusation, only curiosity. "That the evils are necessary?" "I tell myself nothing. I know it for fact." She gestured to the trenches. "Those guardsmen down there, do you know what happens to their families if they desert? Execution. Entire bloodlines purged. Do you know what we do to worlds that refuse the imperial tithe? We take their children by force and turn them into servitors, lobotomized slaves whose minds are wiped clean to serve as organic machinery." Thor's hand tightened on Mjolnir. "You speak of atrocities as if reciting a shopping list." "Because they are facts, not atrocities," Vasseur countered. "The Imperium requires 100 billion soldiers per year to maintain current operations. If we don't take them by tithe, we lose worlds to chaos, Xenos, or rebellion. Which evil do you prefer, Thor of Asgard, forced conscription, or watching entire sectors burn?" Before Thor could answer, warning klaxons screamed across the fortress. Every Vox channel erupted simultaneously with panicked reports. "World Eaters breaching the Western Line. Demon incursion at coordinates. Warp rift opening. Warp rift opening." Thor and Vasseur ran to the strategium. What they found made even the Inquisitor pause. The hololithic display showed something impossible. A massive warp tear had opened behind the World Eater's lines, and through it poured not reinforcements, but something far worse. Greater demons of Khorne, bloodthirsters taller than titans, wreathed in brass and flame, their axes capable of splitting reality itself. But more terrifying was what emerged behind them. A figure that made every sensor in the strategium scream in protest. A figure whose very presence caused devout guardsmen to claw their own eyes out rather than witness such blasphemy. A figure that Thor recognized from Space Wolves legends, told during their drinking sessions. Angron, the demon Primarch, Khorne's greatest champion. The thing that had once been a Primarch, a demigod created by the Emperor himself, now stood 40 feet tall, covered in brass armor fused to demonic flesh, wings of tattered meat spreading from its back, twin chain axes that roared with the screams of 1,000,000 murdered souls. "Throne, protect us," Lord General Kozlov whispered, and for the first time Thor heard genuine despair in the commander's voice. "We cannot stop that." Bjorn Stormwolf burst into the strategium, his face grim. "All units fighting withdrawal. We evacuate what civilians we can and prepare for." "No." Thor's voice cut through the panic like Mjolnir through armor. Every eye turned to him. "We do not run," Thor continued, his eyes fixed on the hololithic image of Angron. "You have shown me your wars, taught me your brutal necessities. Now I will show you what a god can do." "Thor, that is a demon Primarch," Sven said urgently. "Even space wolves fall before such enemies. You cannot." "I have fought Surtur the fire demon, who burned galaxies in my realm," Thor interrupted. "I have battled the serpent Jörmungandr, whose coils encircled worlds. I have stood against the darkness and emerged victorious." He turned to Bjorn. "You asked if I could fight the Imperium's wars. Let me show you the answer." Bjorn studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but you don't fight alone. The Vilka Fenrika fight beside you, or we are no true sons of Rus. As do the guard, Kozlov added, his voice steadying. We may not be Astartes, we may not be gods, but we are soldiers of the Imperium. We do not yield. Thor felt something stir in his chest, not the cold efficiency he'd been developing, but the old fire, the warrior's joy he'd thought this galaxy had extinguished. Then let us give Khorne something to remember, Thor said, and lightning blazed across his form. The plan was insane by any rational measure. Thor would lead a strike force directly at Angron, while the Space Wolves and Imperial Guard held the World Eaters at bay. The goal wasn't to kill the demon Primarch. Such beings could not truly die while their patron god sustained them, but to wound him badly enough that he'd be forced to retreat to the warp to regenerate. They had perhaps a 5% chance of success. In the Imperium, those were considered excellent odds. Thor descended from the cathedral fortress like a meteor wreathed in lightning. Mjolnir spun in his grip, gathering power from the storm clouds above. Not the blood rain now, but true storm clouds that Thor himself had summoned. For the first time since arriving in this nightmare galaxy, he unleashed his full divine might. The battlefield transformed into apocalypse. Lightning struck in columns thick as redwood trees, vaporizing entire squads of World Eaters. Thunder shook the earth hard enough to collapse trenches. Thor moved through the carnage like a force of nature, Mjolnir pulverizing everything it touched. But the World Eaters welcomed this. They charged toward him, screaming Khorne's name, seeking death in glorious battle. And behind them, Angron watched with eyes that burned like dying suns. Another challenger. The demon Primarch's voice was felt rather than heard, vibrating through bones and souls. Another fool who thinks himself worthy. Angron moved with speed that defied his size. One moment he was a mile distant, the next his chain axe was descending toward Thor with force enough to split mountains. Thor caught the blow on Mjolnir, and the impact created a shockwave that flattened everything within 100 meters. Guardsmen were thrown like dolls. World Eaters were crushed by their own falling warriors. I am Thor Odinson, Thor roared back, his voice amplified by divine thunder. And I have fought monsters since before your empire was born. He swung Mjolnir with everything he had. The hammer struck Angron's chest, and for the first time in millennia, the demon Primarch staggered. The watching World Eaters fell silent in shock. Then Angron laughed, a sound like brass bells in a charnel house. Yes, finally, a worthy opponent. They fought like gods warring in heaven. Each blow from Angron's chain axes carved furrows in reality itself. Each strike from Mjolnir released lightning that could have powered a hive city. The ground beneath them turned to molten glass. The air ignited from friction and heat. Thor fought with every technique learned across millennia. He used Angron's size against him, staying mobile, striking weak points in the demon's armor. But Angron was no mindless berserker. Beneath the rage-burned tactical genius honed by 10,000 years of warfare. A chain axe caught Thor across the ribs, and for the first time in this galaxy, Thor felt genuine pain. His Asgardian flesh parted, blood flowing golden rather than red. The wound burned with warp corruption that his divine nature struggled to reject. You bleed well, Angron approved. Khorne will be pleased with your skull. Thor gritted his teeth and channeled lightning directly into the wound, cauterizing it. The pain was excruciating, but it worked. Your blood god will wait a very long time. Around them, the Space Wolves had engaged the World Eaters in earnest. Bjorn led from the front, his ancient fury matching that of the traitors he fought. Sven's pack worked in perfect coordination, their tactics designed specifically for fighting corrupted Astartes. But it was the Imperial Guard that turned the tide. Lord General Kozlov, watching from the command post, saw his opportunity. All artillery batteries, target grid reference Omega-7, danger close. Fire for effect. Sir, that's our own position. Thor and the Space Wolves. I gave you an order, Colonel. Fire. Thousands of artillery pieces spoke as one. The sky filled with incoming ordnance, shells, missiles, plasma charges. They fell like apocalyptic rain on the very position where Imperial forces fought alongside Thor. Fall back, Bjorn roared, recognizing the danger. The Space Wolves retreated at full sprint, their power armor's autosenses screaming warnings. Thor saw the incoming fire and understood instantly what was happening. The Imperium was willing to kill its own forces, himself included, if it meant hurting Angron. This was their way. This was always their way. He had mere seconds to decide. Flee and save himself, leaving the Imperial Guard who couldn't escape to die. Or stay and try to shield as many as possible from the bombardment. In that frozen moment, Thor understood what Sven had meant about breaking. He stayed. Lightning erupted from Thor in a dome, a shield of pure electrical fury that intercepted the first wave of artillery. Shells detonated mid-air. Missiles exploded before impact. But there were thousands of rounds, and even Thor's power had limits. The bombardment lasted 30 seconds. When it cleared, the battlefield was a crater, 500 meters wide. Angron stood at the crater's edge, his demonic resilience having weathered the storm. He was wounded, truly wounded, ichor leaking from dozens of breaches in his armor. But he lived and he was laughing. Thor knelt at the crater's center, Mjolnir planted in the ground before him, his lightning shield dissipating. He had saved perhaps 300 guardsmen who'd been close enough to his protection. Thousands more had died in the bombardment, died on the orders of their own commanders. You tried to save them, Angron observed, his voice almost curious beneath the rage. Even knowing it was futile, even knowing they would sacrifice you without hesitation. Thor raised his head, meeting the demon Primarch's burning gaze. Because it was the right thing to do. Right. Angron's laugh was bitter now. I once believed in right. I fought for slaves in the arenas of New Syria. I died for them. Literally died. My brain cut apart by the butcher's nails to make me a better killer. And do you know what happened? Thor said nothing, but he listened. My father, the Emperor himself, teleported me away as my slave brothers and sisters were slaughtered. He saved me and let them die because I was valuable. Angron's axes lowered slightly. You speak of honor, Golden One. There is no honor in this galaxy. There is only survival and the strong who prey upon the weak. Khorne at least is honest about it. Then your god is an honest monster, Thor replied, slowly rising to his feet. And you are a slave who calls his chains freedom. Angron's eyes blazed with renewed fury. I am no slave. You serve a god who feeds on rage and cares nothing for you. Your brothers turned traitor and you followed because you had no other choice. You were broken by your past and remade into a weapon. Thor gripped Mjolnir tighter. I have seen slavery in many forms, demon. You wear yours and call it liberation. The demon Primarch screamed, and the sound shattered windows in hive cities 100 kilometers away. He charged, both chain axes raised for a strike that would end Thor's existence. But Thor had been buying time. The storm clouds above had grown massive during their conversation, fed by Thor's unconscious will and the planet's own atmospheric fury. Now he called upon them. Lightning fell from the heavens in a solid pillar of divine wrath. Not a bolt, a column kilometers wide, channeling the full fury of a storm god who had finally, truly embraced rage. Angron was caught in the blast's center. Even his demonic form couldn't withstand such power. His armor cracked, his flesh burned, his very essence began to destabilize. "Impressive," Angron admitted through the agony, "but not enough. I have died 1,000 times, Thunder God. I always return." "Then return," Thor snarled, pouring everything he had into the lightning. "And know that someone stood against you, that someone refused to accept your philosophy of might makes right, that even in this nightmare galaxy, honor still exists." The lightning intensified beyond anything Thor had ever achieved. He felt Mjolnir crack in his grip from channeling such power, felt his own body beginning to burn from the energy flowing through it. But it worked. Angron's physical form collapsed, dissolving into warp stuff that fled back through the rift. The greater demons, losing their anchor to reality, followed. The World Eaters, seeing their Primarch banished, retreated in disorder. The battle was won. Thor collapsed, Mjolnir clattering from nerveless fingers. The storm clouds dissipated, revealing a sky that was, for the first time in weeks, clear of blood rain. The last thing Thor saw before unconsciousness claimed him was Sven Bloodhowl's scarred face, looking down with something like awe. "By Russ and the All-Father," the Space Wolf whispered. "He actually did it." Thor woke in the Medicae ward 3 days later. His wounds had been extensive. The warp corruption from Angron's chain axe had nearly killed him, requiring rune priest intervention and an entire week's supply of Fenrisian healing unguents. Mjolnir rested beside his cot, its surface spiderwebbed with hairline cracks, but still whole. "You've been unconscious for 72 hours, a voice said. Inquisitor Vasseur sat in the corner of the room, watching him with those unreadable augmetic eyes. "In that time, you've become something of a legend, the golden-haired warrior who banished a demon Primarch, the Thunder God who saved 300 guardsmen from their own artillery." Thor sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "How many died in total? From the bombardment? Approximately 47,000 Imperial Guard. From the entire battle, 320,000 Guard, 53 Space Wolves." She recited the numbers without inflection. "Acceptable losses. Angron's banishment bought us 6 months before he can manifest again. In that time, we'll fortify Valhalla sector sufficiently to withstand the next assault. Acceptable." Thor's voice was hollow. "You killed 50,000 of your own soldiers to wound an enemy who cannot truly die." "Yes," Vasseur leaned forward, "and I would do it again. So would Lord General Kozlov. So would any commander in the Imperium worth their rank, because in 6 months we'll have reinforced. We'll have evacuated billions of civilians to safer worlds. We'll have bought time for the Administratum to redirect 3 more battle groups to this sector." Her augmetic eyes whirred. "Your Asgardian mathematics might call that a loss. Our mathematics call it a victory worth the price." Thor wanted to rage at her, wanted to channel lightning and demand she see these soldiers as more than numbers. But he couldn't, because he'd done the math himself during the battle. 300 saved versus thousands dead, and in 6 months those 300 could train 3,000 more, who could then train 30,000. He was starting to think like them, and it terrified him. "There's something else you should know," Vasseur continued. "Your battle with Angron was observed by interested parties. The ruinous powers take notice of those who thwart their champions, particularly Khorne." As if summoned by his name, Thor felt it, a pressure at the edge of his consciousness, a presence vast and terrible, like staring into an ocean of blood that looked back with hunger and approval. "Warrior." The voice wasn't heard but felt, resonating in Thor's bones. "You fight well. You rage beautifully. You understand that only through conflict is truth revealed." "No," Thor whispered, gripping the cot's sides hard enough to bend the metal. "I will not listen to you, demon. I am no daemon, thunder god. I am Khorne, war incarnate. Honest battle without the lies your Imperium tells itself about noble sacrifice." The presence pressed closer. "You know I speak truth. You saw how they used you, how they'll continue to use you. But serve me, and there will be no lies, only combat, only strength, proving itself against strength." "Get out of his head." Vasseur was on her feet, her power sword ignited, though it could do nothing against a god's whisper. "Rune priest, we need—" "She serves a corpse god who devours 1,000 souls daily to maintain his half-life. I offer you infinity. Join my legends. Fight forever in the blood-soaked fields of the warp. No glory without end." Thor's hand found Mjolnir, and the hammer's familiar weight anchored him. "I have faced temptation before, blood god. Loki's silver tongue, Hela's promises of power, the infinity stones themselves. I have refused them all, because you clung to morality in a universe that rewarded it. But this galaxy cares nothing for your honor. It will grind you down until you're just another piece in its meat grinder. Then I will be ground down with my honor intact." Thor stood, lightning crackling across his form. "I have seen what you create, Khorne. Ongron was once a hero who fought for slaves. You turned him into a monster who glories in slaughter. I will never, never serve you." The presence retreated slightly, and Thor felt something unexpected in its wake. Amusement. "We shall see, thunder god. This galaxy has broken stronger men than you. I will enjoy watching your inevitable fall." And then it was gone, leaving only the echo of brass bells and screaming. Thor collapsed back onto the cot, shaking. Vasseur approached cautiously, her sword still ignited. "You refused Khorne directly," she said, and for the first time Thor heard something like respect in her voice. "Do you understand how rare that is? Even space marines, even Grey Knights, can be tempted by the blood god's whispers. But you—" She deactivated her blade. "You may actually be what we need." "And what is that?" Thor asked bitterly. "Another weapon?" "No, an example." Vasseur sat back down. "The Imperium runs on faith, Thor. Faith that the Emperor protects. Faith that our suffering has meaning. Faith that there's something beyond mere survival worth fighting for." She gestured to his cracked hammer. "You represent something we'd almost forgotten. Genuine heroism. Not the martyrdom we cultivate, not the fanaticism we worship, but actual heroism born of choice and conviction. Heroism that your commanders nearly killed with artillery fire," Thor pointed out. "Yes," Vasseur agreed, "because in the Imperium, even heroes are expendable if it serves the greater good. That's the tragedy we live with." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "But perhaps if we had more heroes who refused to be expended, who demanded better from us, we might remember what we're supposed to be fighting for beyond simple survival." She left, and Thor was alone with his thoughts and his cracked hammer. Over the next week, as his wounds healed, Thor witnessed the aftermath of victory. The Imperial Guard was reorganized, with survivors promoted to replace the dead officers. New regiments arrived from across the sector, fresh-faced soldiers who would learn the same brutal lessons their predecessors had. Commissar Hendrik, the same officer who'd first encountered Thor, visited the Medicae ward. He'd been promoted to Major Commissar for his actions during the battle. "I wanted to thank you," Hendrik said awkwardly. "My son serves in the 104th. He was one of the 300 you saved from the bombardment." Thor looked up. "I did not know." "You couldn't have. We number in billions." Hendrik's weathered face softened. "But he's alive because you chose to stay, Because you cared enough about individual lives to risk your own. He performed the sign of the Aquila. Whatever you are, alien, psyker, or god, you have my loyalty. After Hendrik left, Private Mikkel visited, his left arm replaced with a crude augmetic. The boy who'd asked if Thor was an angel now wore a medal for valor and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen hell. "They're calling you the Stormwalker," Mikkel said. "Say you're an aspect of the Emperor's wrath given form. The priests are already writing prayers in your name." "I am no aspect of your Emperor," Thor said gently. "I am just a warrior trying to do what's right." "Then that's what we'll pray to," Mikkel replied with the simple faith of the young. "The warrior who does what's right, even when it costs everything." Thor wanted to tell him that such faith was misplaced, that he was flawed, that he'd nearly broken under this galaxy's weight, that even now Korn's words echoed in his mind. But looking at Mikkel's hopeful face, Thor understood something crucial. These people needed hope, even false hope, to survive. And perhaps in trying to live up to their faith, he might become worthy of it. On the seventh day, Bjorn Stormwolf summoned Thor to the cathedral fortress's chapel. The Space Wolf Lord stood before a massive aquila, his ancient eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "The chapter has debated your status," Bjorn said without preamble. "Some believe you're a weapon sent by the Emperor. Others think you're a test of our faith. Rune Priest Ulrich believes you're something entirely outside the Imperium's experience." "And what do you believe?" Thor asked. Bjorn was silent for a long moment. "I believe you're dangerous. Not because you're corrupted or hostile, but because you remind us of what we've lost." He turned to face Thor fully. "The Space Wolves remember, Thor of Asgard. We remember the Emperor during the Great Crusade, before he became a god. We remember when the Imperium was about building, not just surviving. When there was still joy in battle, not just duty." "You speak as if those days are dead," Thor observed. "They are. The heresy killed them. 10,000 years of endless war buried them." Bjorn's voice was heavy with millennia of grief. "But seeing you fight, seeing you refuse to accept that cruelty is necessary, that individual lives don't matter, it stirred something in my pack, in me. Dangerous thoughts about whether we've become the monsters we fight." Thor stepped closer. "Then perhaps it's time to remember. Time to be more than just survivors. Time to... Be careful, Thor." Bjorn's warning cut through his idealism. The Imperium doesn't tolerate reformers. It grinds them down or executes them as heretics. You've earned respect through combat, but that will only protect you so long as you remain useful. Start preaching change, start questioning Imperial doctrine, and even I won't be able to save you from the Inquisition. Then the Inquisition can try to stop me, Thor said, lightning flickering across his fists. I did not come to this galaxy to become another cog in its machine of suffering. I came... He stopped. I came by accident. But now that I'm here, I will not stand idle while billions suffer unnecessarily. Bjorn sighed. You sound like Angron once did. Like all the Primarchs did, before the galaxy taught them otherwise. He placed a massive hand on Thor's shoulder. You banished a demon Primarch, Thor. That's earned you the right to join my great company officially. The Vulca Fenrika offer you brotherhood. Will you accept? Thor looked at the Aquila, at the symbol of an Imperium that both disgusted and fascinated him. He thought of the guardsmen who'd died by the thousands, of Private Mikkel's simple faith, of Vasur's pragmatic cruelty, of Korn's tempting honesty. I will fight alongside the Space Wolves, Thor said carefully. I will stand against Chaos and Xenos threats, but I will not pledge myself to the Imperium's doctrine. I will do what is right, not what is ordered. Bjorn's face split into a savage grin. That's the most Space Wolves answer I've ever heard from a non-Fenrisian. Welcome to the pack, Stormwalker. He clasped Thor's wrist in the warrior's grip. May you survive long enough to regret it. They drank Emjord that night, the real stuff, brewed in the Frostfang's ancient breweries from Fenrisian recipes. The Space Wolves accepted Thor as one of their own, even knowing he stood apart from Imperial doctrine. But as Thor drank and laughed with warriors who reminded him painfully of home, he felt the weight of chains settling around him. Not physical chains, but something more insidious. The Imperium was vast. Its doctrine was enforced by inquisitors with absolute authority. Its wars consumed galaxies. How could one warrior, no matter how powerful, make any difference against such inexorable momentum? And in the dark corners of his mind, Khorne's laughter echoed still. 3 months passed in a blur of warfare. Thor fought alongside the Space Wolves across Valhalla sector, liberating worlds from World-Eater warbands, evacuating civilians from demon-infested hive cities, standing watch as Exterminatus cleansed planets too corrupted to save. Each battle reinforced the brutal calculus of Imperial warfare: save what you can, destroy what you can't. Measure success by how many die today versus how many might die tomorrow. Thor had become efficient, frighteningly efficient. He calculated civilian casualties versus strategic advantage without hesitation. Recommended scorched earth tactics when retreat wasn't viable. Executed suspected cultists without trial because investigations took time the Imperium couldn't spare. Mjolnir's cracks had deepened, the hammer still functioned, but its weight felt different now, heavier with each compromise, each necessary evil, each time Thor chose expediency over honor. He should have noticed the warning signs. The deployment to Salvation's End should have been routine, a forge world besieged by iron warriors seeking its STC fragments. The Space Wolves would break the siege. Thor would handle the Chaos Sorcerers, and billions of menials would continue their miserable existence serving the machine god. But nothing in the 41st Millennium was ever routine. Tactical overview, Bjorn commanded as their Thunderhawks descended through orbital fire. The hololithic display showed Salvation's End, a world where every surface was factory, where the sky was permanently black from pollution, where workers were born, labored, and died without ever seeing sunlight. Primary Manufactorum Complex holds 15 billion menials, Tech Priest Dominus Craval reported, his voice a mechanical rasp. Siege has lasted 3 months, food supplies exhausted, water recyclers failing. The Omnissiah's servants resort to improvised sustenance. Thor's stomach turned. You mean cannibalism? Irrelevant designation. Protein reclamation from deceased workers maintains marginal efficiency. Craval's augmetic eyes showed no emotion. The STC fragments are priority. The Mechanicus requires their recovery. Menial survival is secondary consideration. Secondary. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. These are human beings. They are resources allocated to the Omnissiah's service, Craval corrected. As are you, Stormwalker. Your function is demon elimination. Please confine your processing to designated parameters. Sven, standing beside Thor, grimaced. The Mechanicus doesn't think like us, Thor. They see everything through efficiency metrics. Trying to make them care about individual lives is like teaching a rock to weep. They landed in the Manufactorum's central district, a nightmare landscape of churning machinery where hab blocks were literally built into factory equipment, so workers need never stop production. The menials were emaciated, their eyes hollow, many bearing the scars of self-inflicted wounds to provide flesh for others to eat. But they still worked, 18 hours a day, praying to the machine god, hoping the Emperor would deliver them. The Iron Warriors had blockaded the entire district, their siege batteries pounding the complex into rubble while Chaos cultists infiltrated through sewer systems. The plan was simple: assault the Iron Warriors' positions, break the siege, and allow resupply convoys through. But there was a complication. The enemy has positioned artillery inside civilian shelters, Lord General Kozlov reported, his Vox signal crackling with static. If we counter battery, we'll kill tens of thousands of our own people. If we don't, their guns will continue shredding our supply convoys. Thor saw where this was heading. You're asking permission to fire on our own civilians. I'm asking for tactical assessment, Stormwalker, Kozlov replied coldly. 10,000 die now, or 10 million starve over the next month when supplies can't get through. Your recommendation? It was a test. Thor knew it. The Imperium constantly tested whether he'd truly internalized their brutal logic. Hold fire, Thor commanded. I'll handle the artillery myself. Thor, those emplacements are shielded against... Sven started. I said I'll handle it. Thor launched skyward before anyone could argue. He flew toward the civilian shelters, massive ferrocrete structures where workers huddled between shifts, seeking precious hours of sleep. The Iron Warriors had set up their artillery in the shelter's centers, using human shields with cold tactical brilliance. Thor descended to the first shelter's entrance. Hundreds of menials packed the space, staring at him with eyes that had forgotten hope. The artillery pieces, massive quad Lascanoons on automated turrets, dominated the chamber's center, their targeting systems tracking Imperial positions. Leave, Thor commanded the civilians. Now. They didn't move, couldn't move. Malnutrition had robbed them of the strength to flee. I said, leave. Thor's voice became thunder itself, and the shelter's walls cracked from sonic pressure. This motivated them. The menials scrambled toward exits, trampling each other in their panic. Thor waited until the last had fled, then approached the artillery. The Lascannons swiveled toward him, their machine spirits identifying a threat. They fired in perfect synchronization, 4 beams of coherent light that should have vaporized anything in their path. Thor caught them on Mjolnir, and the hammer's depleted enchantments screamed in protest. Cracks spread further across its surface. But Thor channeled the energy, redirected it, sent it back into the Lascannons with compound interest. The artillery exploded in a cascade of plasma and shrapnel. Thor moved to the next shelter, then the next, systematically destroying every emplacement while evacuating civilians. It took 6 hours. By the end, every artillery piece was scrap metal, and tens of thousands of menials had fled to safer districts. Thor returned to the command post exhausted but satisfied. He'd found a solution that didn't require wholesale slaughter. He'd proven that sometimes, with enough effort, you could save everyone. Bjorn met him at the post's entrance, and the Wolf Lord's expression stopped Thor cold. What happened? The menials you evacuated, Bjorn said quietly. They had nowhere to go. The safer districts were already over capacity, so they fled into the Underhive. Thor felt ice forming in his gut. And? Genestealer cult had been waiting for refugees. They ambushed the crowds. Thor, they killed or infected 70,000 people. Bjorn's voice was heavy. The civilians you saved became either corpses or tyrannid hybrids. The world tilted. Thor steadied himself against a wall, Mjolnir suddenly impossibly heavy. If you'd let Kozlov fire the artillery, Sven added, approaching from behind, 10,000 would have died. Clean. Quick. The supplies would have gotten through. The 70,000 in other districts would still be alive. No. Thor's voice was a whisper. No, there had to be another way. If I just... There wasn't another way, Bjorn interrupted, not unkindly. This is what we try to teach you, Thor. The Imperium's mathematics are brutal because reality is brutal. Your heroic solution felt right in the moment, but it cost 7 times as many lives. Thor sank to his knees, Mjolnir clattering from his grip. He looked at his hands, hands that could channel lightning, that had banished a demon Primarch, that were stained with the blood of 70,000 people he'd tried to save. "I was trying to do the right thing," Thor said, and hated how plaintive his voice sounded. "The right thing got them killed," Vasur's voice cut through his misery. The Inquisitor had been observing from the shadows. "Welcome to the 41st Millennium, Thor Odinson, where good intentions pave the road to damnation, and hard choices are the only choices that work." Thor reached for Mjolnir, and his hand stopped inches from the handle. The hammer didn't move. He tried again, wrapping his fingers around the familiar leather grip. Nothing. Mjolnir remained on the ground, as immovable as if welded to the planet's core. "No. What's wrong?" Sven asked, seeing Thor's expression. I cannot lift it." Thor's voice broke. "The enchantment. My father's enchantment. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. And I am no longer worthy." The space wolves exchanged glances. None of them understood the full implications, but they recognized crisis when they saw it. Thor tried again, pouring all his strength into the attempt. Mjolnir wouldn't budge. The hammer had judged him and found him wanting. Not because he'd been corrupted by chaos, but because he'd compromised too much, calculated too coldly, let the Imperium turn him into something that valued efficiency over righteousness. The menial's deaths, that had been the breaking point. He'd made a choice that felt heroic, that satisfied his Asgardian values, and it had killed 70,000 innocents. But if he'd made the Imperial choice, the cold, pragmatic calculation, 10,000 would have died and 70,000 would have lived. Either choice was monstrous, but one was objectively better by every measure except Thor's pride. And Mjolnir knew it. "Leave me," Thor whispered. "Thor, we can—" Bjorn started. "I said leave me." Lightning exploded from Thor's body, wild and uncontrolled now without Mjolnir to channel it. The command post's walls cracked, equipment shorted out. The space wolves withdrew, leaving Thor alone with his failure. He knelt before Mjolnir for hours, trying every plea, every promise, every argument. The hammer remained inert. Finally, as dawn broke over Salvation's End's polluted sky, Thor spoke the truth he'd been avoiding. "You're right to reject me," he told the hammer. "I am not the warrior I was. This galaxy has changed me, made me harder, made me willing to calculate acceptable losses and call it strategy." He touched Mjolnir's surface gently. "But I cannot be the hero I was, Father. Not here. Asgardian values don't work in a universe built on suffering. I tried so hard, and my heroism killed 70,000 people." The hammer offered no comfort, no response. Thor left it there and walked into the manufactorum alone. For 3 days he fought without Mjolnir. He channeled lightning through his bare hands, feeling it burn his flesh without the hammer's protection. He wrestled iron warriors in close combat, taking wounds that should have killed him. He threw himself into battle with reckless abandon, seeking either victory or death. The space wolves watched with growing concern as Thor transformed into something darker. He made the cold calculations now. When given a choice between saving civilians or achieving tactical objectives, he chose objectives. When enemy positions used human shields, he struck without hesitation. He'd learned his lesson. He'd become what the Imperium needed, and it was destroying him. On the 4th day, as Thor stood over the corpse of an Iron Warrior's warsmith he'd killed with his bare hands, Sven found him. "You need to rest," Sven said quietly. "I need to fight." Thor's voice was hollow. "It's the only thing I'm good for now. A weapon, a tool. Isn't that what you wanted? No. Sven grabbed Thor's shoulder, forcing him to meet his eyes. We wanted an ally, a battle brother, someone who'd help us remember why we fight. But you're becoming one of them, one of the dead inside killers who do what's necessary and feel nothing. Feeling gets people killed, Thor replied mechanically. I learned that lesson. And when you stop feeling, you become Angron. You become everything Khorne represents. Sven's grip tightened. Thor, listen to me. The Imperium needs cold calculators. We have billions of those. What we don't have, what we desperately need, are people who still care, who still feel the weight of the dead, who make the hard choices but hate themselves for it. That's just slow corruption, Thor said. Better to accept the necessity and move forward. Sven slapped him. The blow was hard enough to snap Thor's head sideways, drawing blood from his split lip. Wake up, Sven roared. Your hammer rejected you because you tried to be something you're not. You tried to be perfectly heroic in a universe that punishes heroism, and when that failed, you're trying to be perfectly pragmatic. But you're neither. You're Thor Odinson, flawed, struggling, trying to find a middle path between honor and necessity. That's who we need. Thor touched his bleeding lip, and for the first time in days, felt something beyond numbness. Pain, confusion, grief. I don't know how to be that person, Thor admitted. I don't know how to live in a universe where every choice is monstrous, and the best I can hope for is choosing the least monstrous option. None of us do, Sven replied. That's why we drink, why we tell stories, why we hold on to our pack bonds and our traditions, because without them we'd all go mad. He pulled Thor to his feet. Come back to the pack, brother. We'll figure this out together. That night, Bjorn called a gathering of his entire great company. Warriors who'd fought for centuries stood in the Frostfang's great hall, and at the center, Thor stood without his hammer. The Stormwalker has learned what we all learn, Bjorn announced to the assembled wolves, that this galaxy breaks heroes, that honor is a luxury and pragmatism is survival. And in learning this, he's become what he feared most, just another Imperial weapon. Murmurs ran through the crowd. But here's what Thor doesn't understand yet, Bjorn continued. Being broken doesn't mean being destroyed. We're all broken, brothers. Every one of us carries compromises, carries the weight of people we couldn't save, carries the guilt of orders we followed when we should have rebelled. He looked at Thor directly. The difference between us and the traitors isn't that we never break. It's that when we break, we put ourselves back together and keep fighting anyway. I have nothing to fight with, Thor said quietly. My hammer was a crutch, Bjorn interrupted. Power that came from an enchantment, from someone else's judgment of your worthiness. But you've always had lightning, Thor. That's your power, not the hammer's. Yours. Thor looked at his hands, remembering. Yes, the lightning had always been his. Mjolnir focused it, controlled it, but the storm itself was his birthright. The question isn't whether you're worthy by your father's standards, Sven added. It's whether you can forgive yourself for being human, for making mistakes, for learning brutal lessons, for surviving in a universe that demands compromises. He stepped forward. Your hammer judged you unworthy. Fine. Forge a new worthiness, not Asgard's version, not the Imperium's, your own. Thor felt something crack inside him, not breaking, but breaking open. The numbness he'd cultivated shattered, and beneath it was pain and grief and horror at what he'd become and what he'd lost. And in that moment of utter vulnerability, lightning blazed across his hands. Not controlled, not focused through Mjolnir, just raw power, expressing his emotional truth, that he was broken and struggling and refused to give up despite it all. There, Ulrich Frostbeard said from the crowd, his psychic senses reading the shift. That's the warrior we need. Not perfectly heroic, not perfectly pragmatic, just perfectly himself. Thor looked at the assembled space wolves, these warriors who'd welcomed a stranger, who'd taught him their brutal truths, who'd watched him break and were now helping him rebuild. I still don't know how to be worthy in this galaxy, Thor admitted, but I'll keep trying. I'll make the hard choices when necessary, but I'll hate myself for them. I'll fight with pragmatism when I must, and honor when I can. And maybe that's enough. It'll have to be, Bjorn said, because the war's not over, Stormwalker. Khorne still hungers for you. The Imperium still needs you. And somewhere out there, your hammer waits for you to prove yourself again. Thor nodded, accepting the weight of it all. He'd lost Mjolnir, lost his certainty, lost the clear moral lines that had defined his existence. But he'd gained something too, the beginnings of wisdom about navigating moral complexity, about living with guilt without letting it paralyze you, about being a hero in a universe that didn't believe in heroes. It wasn't much, but in the grim darkness of the 41st Millennium, it was enough to keep fighting. Thunder rumbled through the Frostfang, and for the first time in days, it sounded like a promise rather than a threat. 2 weeks after Thor lost Mjolnir, Inquisitor Vasseur received a transmission that changed everything. It came from the inquisitorial fortress Cryptus, encrypted with codes that indicated Ordo Malleus' highest priority. Thor sat in the briefing chamber alongside Bjorn, Sven, and Ulrich when Vasseur revealed the transmission's contents. The hololithic display showed something that made even the space wolves tense. A warp rift, but not like the others Thor had seen. This one was stable, controlled, and it pulsed with energy signatures that the Mechanicus had never encountered before. Power readings that didn't match any known technology, Imperial or Xenos. The rift appeared in the Gehenna system 3 days ago, Vasseur explained. Astropaths report anomalous sensations, not chaos corruption, but something equally alien. The energy signature matches nothing in Imperial records except, she paused for effect, except the readings we took from Thor Odinson when he first arrived. Every eye turned to Thor. You believe this rift is connected to me? Thor asked, lightning unconsciously crackling across his arms. Since losing Mjolnir, his control had been erratic, his power expressing itself in bursts tied to his emotional state. I believe it's a doorway, Vasseur replied, possibly back to your origin point, possibly to somewhere else entirely, but the Inquisition has determined that investigation is mandatory. If there's a stable passage to realms beyond our galaxy, we need to understand it. Her augmetic eyes fixed on Thor. And you're our expert on trans-dimensional phenomena. You want me to go through, Thor said slowly. It wasn't a question. I want us to go through, Vasseur corrected. You, myself, a strike force of space wolves, and full Mechanicus support. We investigate, we gather intelligence, and if it is a path to your home, we determine whether your Asgard represents a threat to humanity. The implications hit Thor like a physical blow. You would invade my realm? We would assess it, Bjorn interjected diplomatically. Thor, you've seen what threats exist in this galaxy. If there's a stable warp rift connecting to another dimension, we cannot leave it unexplored. Either it's a threat we need to close, or it's a potential resource we need to secure. Thor wanted to rage at them, to reject the idea of the Imperium's machinery turning its attention toward Asgard, but he understood their logic. In their position, having seen what Chaos and Xenos could do, they couldn't afford to ignore unknown variables. And beneath his anger, Thor felt something else, hope. Hope that he might return home, hope that he might see Asgard again, might escape this nightmare galaxy. Hope and terrible guilt, because part of him had grown attached to this broken universe and the warriors he'd fought beside. When do we deploy? Thor asked finally. Immediately, Vasseur replied. The rift's stability is unknown. It could collapse at any moment, or it could widen into something catastrophic. We have a narrow window. They took 2 strike cruisers, the Frostfang and Vasseur's personal vessel, the Righteous Execution. The journey through the warp to Gehenna system took 4 days that felt like 4 centuries, the Imperium churning with unusual turbulence, as if something vast was aware of their passage. Thor spent the journey training without Mjolnir, learning to weaponize lightning through direct channeling. It was painful. His flesh wasn't designed to conduct such power without the hammer's protection, but he was adapting. Scars formed across his arms where electricity burned too hot. His healing factor, pushed to its limits, struggled to keep up. Sven watched one training session with concern. "You're hurting yourself." "Pain is irrelevant," Thor replied, sounding more like a space marine than he cared to admit. "I need to be effective." "No," Sven corrected. "You need to be whole. There's a difference." He gestured to Thor's scarred arms. "You're punishing yourself for the menials, for losing your hammer, for every compromise you've made. But self-destruction isn't penance, brother. It's just another way of giving up." Thor let the lightning fade, suddenly exhausted. "How do you carry it, Sven? The weight of all your failures." "By remembering my successes too," Sven replied. "You banished Angron. You saved 300 guardsmen when you could have saved yourself. You refused Khorne's temptation. These things matter. 70,000 dead matters more." "It all matters. That's the point." Sven sat beside him. "You want certainty, Thor. You want to be either perfectly heroic or perfectly pragmatic. But wisdom is holding contradictions. Knowing you did something terrible and necessary, hating yourself for it, but moving forward anyway because the alternative is paralysis." Before Thor could respond, alarms screamed throughout the ship. They'd arrived at Gehenna system. The rift dominated the view screen, a tear in reality 50 kilometers wide, its edges stabilized by what looked like crystalline structures that definitely weren't chaos in origin. Energy poured through in waves, and Thor felt his heart leap as he recognized the signature. It was similar to Bifrost energy, not identical, but related, as if someone had reverse-engineered the Bifrost's dimensional breach technology and created a stable passage. "Scanning," Tech Priest Kraval announced, his manifold sensors drinking in data. "Rift terminus is uncertain, fluctuating, but the energy signature matches Stormwalker baseline readings at 94.7% correlation. Conclusion: this rift connects to his origin dimension." "Or something that wants us to think it does," Vasseur added suspiciously. "This could be a trap. Chaos is subtle when it wants to be." Ulrich Frostbeard approached the view screen, his psychic senses extended. "No chaos taint. No warp corruption. This is clean. Impossibly clean." He turned to Vasseur. "Whatever created this, it's not from our galaxy. Not from any dimension the warp touches." "Then we proceed with caution," Bjorn decided. "Combat deployment. Full battle readiness. Thor, you take point. If this is connected to your home, you'll recognize threats before we do." The strike force assembled in the main hangar. 50 space wolves in full battle plate, 20 inquisitorial stormtroopers, 5 tech priests, Vasseur herself in power armor, and Thor. No hammer, just lightning and determination. They loaded into a modified Thunderhawk fitted with Geller fields and warp stabilizers, then launched toward the rift. As they approached, Thor felt the energy signature growing stronger, and with it, a pulling sensation, as if the rift recognized him and was calling him home. The Thunderhawk penetrated the rift's edge, and reality screamed. Thor's senses overloaded with input, glimpses of impossible geometries, colors that didn't exist in the visible spectrum, sounds that predated language. The ship's machine spirits howled in protest as physics became negotiable. Then suddenly, they were through. The first thing Thor noticed was the light. Real light, golden sunlight that didn't filter through pollution or atmospheric corruption. The second was the sky, actually blue, with clouds that were white instead of toxic gray. They'd emerged in space above a planet that looked almost like Asgard's realm, but not quite. Crystalline spires reached toward the heavens, seas that sparkled with impossible colors, and across the surface, structures that combined advanced technology with aesthetic beauty, so unlike the Imperium's grim functionality. "What is this place?" Bjorn breathed, his scarred face slack with wonder. I don't know," Thor admitted. "This isn't Asgard, but it's similar, like someone tried to recreate the 9 realms from description." Warning runes lit across the Thunderhawk's console. They had company. Ships emerged from behind the planet's moons, sleek vessels that combined organic curves with geometric precision. Their design was neither imperial, Xenos, nor chaos. They were something else entirely. "Multiple contacts," the pilot reported. "6 vessels, frigate-class equivalent. They're hailing us." "Open channels," Vasseur commanded. The voice that came through was melodious, alien, and spoke in a language Thor hadn't heard in months. Old Asgardian. "Travelers from the Dark Realm, you have entered the Sanctum of Echoes. State your purpose or be cleansed for the safety of preserved reality." Thor's throat tightened. "They know Asgardian. How?" "Respond," Bjorn urged. Thor stepped forward, channeling lightning to amplify his voice through the Vox system. "I am Thor Odinson, son of Odin, displaced from my realm by cosmic accident. I seek understanding of this place and, if possible, passage home." Silence. Then, "Thor Odinson. Yes, we have waited for your return. The architects predicted your arrival would herald the convergence, when the Dark Realm and the Preserved Realms must confront their philosophical differences." The voice's tone shifted to something almost sad. "We welcome you, Stormwalker. But know that you have changed. The darkness you carry now, it concerns us. Bring your companions. The architects will determine if any may leave this place alive." The transmission cut. "That sounded like a threat," Sven observed, weapons ready. "That sounded like people who know more than they should," Vasseur corrected. "Proceed with extreme caution. If this is a trap—" "It's not a trap," Ulrich interrupted, his psychic senses screaming data. "It's worse. These beings, they're observers, watchers. They've been monitoring Thor since he arrived in our galaxy. They know everything he's done, every choice he's made." The rune priest's glowing eyes turned to Thor. "They're judging whether you've been corrupted beyond redemption." Thor felt ice in his veins. "Corrupted? I've resisted chaos." "Not chaos corruption," Ulrich said. "Moral corruption. These beings care about how you've changed philosophically, whether the Imperium's brutality has broken something fundamental in your spirit." The Thunderhawk descended toward the planet's surface, guided by landing coordinates the alien ships had transmitted. As they broke atmosphere, Thor saw the world in detail, beautiful beyond anything in the 41st Millennium, but also alien in ways that made his warrior instincts scream. This was a museum, a preserved realm where beings had recreated the aesthetics of lost civilizations, Asgardian architecture, yes, but also hints of other cosmic cultures. It was beautiful and deeply wrong, like a corpse preserved in amber. They landed in a plaza of crystalline structures, and waiting for them were beings that made Thor's breath catch. They looked almost Asgardian, tall, noble, golden-skinned. But their eyes held too much knowledge, too much cold calculation. They wore robes that shifted colors like living kaleidoscopes, and their presence felt similar to the Watchers he'd encountered in his travels, ancient observers who recorded cosmic events but rarely intervened. The lead figure stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonics that suggested it wasn't entirely physical. Thor Odinson. We are the architects of echo, preservers of dying realities, recorders of civilizations that face extinction. We have monitored your journey through the dark realm you call the Imperium. Its eyes, too knowing, too judgmental, scanned Thor from head to toe. And we are disappointed. Thor felt anger flash through him. Disappointed? You were a beacon of hope. A warrior who embodied heroism and nobility. We had hoped that entering the Dark Realm would allow you to illuminate it, to show those trapped in cycles of brutality that better ways exist. The architect's voice carried profound sadness. Instead, you allowed it to change you. You calculated casualties. You accepted atrocities as necessary. You became precisely what that realm creates, another weapon that has forgotten why it fights. I fought to save people. Thor's lightning flared. I refused chaos. I stood against a demon Primarch. And you killed with cold efficiency. You made pragmatic choices that saved many by sacrificing few. You learned to value survival over honor. The architect gestured to Thor's scarred arms, his empty hand where Mjolnir should rest. You lost your worthiness because you compromised your principles, and now you stand before us, carrying the darkness like a cloak, and wonder why we judge you. Behind Thor, the space wolves bristled. Sven's hand moved toward his weapons. Choose your next words carefully, alien, Bjorn growled. You may have power, but we are not easily intimidated. The architect's gaze shifted to the space wolves, and something like pity crossed its perfect features. You embody everything wrong with the Dark Realm. Warriors so conditioned to horror that you can no longer imagine alternatives. You defend Thor's corruption because you yourselves are corrupted, unable to see that pragmatism and brutality are not synonymous, that survival and morality need not be opposed. Enough, Vasseur interrupted, her power sword igniting. We came seeking information about the rift. Either provide it or we'll extract it by force. Force. The architect's laugh was like crystal shattering. You stand in a realm that could unweave you from existence with thought alone, and you threaten force. This is why the Dark Realm is doomed. It knows only violence, only domination, only the grinding calculus of acceptable losses. The architects began to glow with power that made even Thor's lightning seem dim. We offer you a choice, Thor Odinson, the lead architect declared. Remain here in the Sanctum of Echoes. Let us cleanse the corruption from your spirit, restore the hero you once were, or return to the Dark Realm and continue your descent into the monster it creates. But know this, if you return, we will seal the rift. You will never find passage home to Asgard. You will spend eternity in that nightmare, becoming ever more like the broken warriors who surround you. Thor looked at the architects, beings who judged without understanding, who offered purity without acknowledging complexity. Then he looked at his companions, space wolves who'd watched him break and helped him rebuild, an inquisitor who represented brutal pragmatism but also genuine devotion to protecting humanity, tech priests who'd lost their humanity in service to their faith. They were monsters, all of them, including himself now, but they were monsters who fought against even worse darkness. Your offer is tempting, Thor said slowly. To return to who I was, to be perfectly heroic again, to never feel the weight of 70,000 dead because I tried to save them all. The architects nodded, sensing acceptance. "But I refuse," Thor continued, and lightning exploded across his form. "Because you're wrong. The Imperium hasn't just corrupted me. It's taught me that heroism isn't about being perfectly noble. It's about fighting despite moral compromise, about hating yourself for necessary evils but doing them anyway, about surviving in hell without becoming the devil." He turned to face the space wolves, seeing them clearly now. Broken warriors holding on to their humanity through pack bonds and traditions, through remembering why they fight, even when the reasons seem meaningless. "These warriors aren't perfect," Thor declared. "Neither am I anymore, but we fight against darkness using darkness, and we haven't forgotten what we're protecting. That's worth more than your preserved purity, Architect. That's real." The Architect's expressions hardened. "Then you are truly lost." "No," Thor replied. "I'm found, and I'm going home." He meant the Imperium. He meant the Frostfang and Valhalla sector, and the endless war that would consume him eventually. He meant hell, and he chose it willingly. The Architects raised their hands, reality bending around them. "So be it. Return to your darkness, corrupted god, and when your spirit finally breaks completely, remember that we offered salvation." Lightning met cosmic power in the Sanctum of Echoes, and Thor Odinson, no longer perfectly worthy, no longer the hero he'd been, but something harder and more real, fought for his right to remain broken. Because breaking didn't mean defeated. And in the 41st Millennium, sometimes the broken were the only ones strong enough to keep fighting. The battle in the Sanctum of Echoes began with a single devastating truth. The Architects weren't warriors. They were preservers, observers, beings who'd spent eons recording the deaths of civilizations without interfering. They possessed immense power, reality-warping abilities that could unmake matter with thought, but they'd never truly fought. The Space Wolves had fought for centuries. Fenris Hjolda, Bjorn's battle cry, echoed across the crystalline plaza as his great company opened fire. Bolt rounds that should have been ineffective against beings of pure energy found purchase, because the Architects had made themselves physical to judge Thor, and physicality meant vulnerability. The lead Architect stumbled as explosive rounds tore through its shimmering robes. "This is violence. You dare bring violence to the Sanctum." "Violence is all we know," Sven snarled, his frost axe carving through another Architect's attempted reality warp. "And we're very good at it." Thor channeled lightning in torrents, no longer trying to control it perfectly, but letting it express his fury. The Architects had offered him salvation, a return to simplicity, to clear morality, to being the hero he'd been. And he'd rejected it because salvation that required forgetting, that demanded he abandon warriors who'd stood beside him in hell, was no salvation at all. It was cowardice dressed as virtue. "You don't understand." The lead Architect's form began shifting, becoming less solid as panic set in. "The Dark Realm corrupts everything it touches. Look at what you've become, murderers, calculators of acceptable death. Weapons that have forgotten they were once men." "We remember," Bjorn replied, his frost blade impaling the Architect through its crystalline chest. "We remember every day. We carry the weight of what we've become, and we fight anyway. That's not corruption. That's devotion." Thor found himself fighting alongside Vasur, the Inquisitor's power sword weaving patterns of destruction through Architect constructs. She fought with mechanical efficiency, each strike calculated for maximum effect. It should have been cold, soulless. But Thor saw the way her jaw tightened when an Architect screamed, saw the momentary hesitation before killing strikes, saw the humanity beneath the pragmatism. "They're right about you," Thor called over the chaos of battle. "You are corrupted. You execute billions without blinking." "Yes," Vasur replied, not defending herself. "But I blink afterward. I remember their faces. I add their names to the litany I recite every night before sleep." She bisected an architect with clinical precision. "The day I stop feeling the weight is the day I'll put my bolt pistol to my head and pull the trigger." Thor understood then. The Imperium's warriors weren't monsters because they'd lost their humanity. They were monsters because they'd kept it. And that humanity screamed in agony with every necessary atrocity, every calculated sacrifice, every time they chose the lesser evil and had to live with what that meant. The architects were falling back, their preserved reality crumbling under the onslaught of warriors who'd been forged in humanity's worst nightmare. Their power was vast but untested, theoretical rather than practical. The Space Wolves' fury was honed by 10,000 years of warfare. "Cease!" the lead architect's voice boomed with desperation. "You prove our point with every death. You are violence incarnate, unable to conceive of solutions beyond slaughter." "Then show us another solution," Thor roared back, his lightning forming a spear of crackling energy. "You've watched civilizations die. You've preserved their echoes in this museum realm. What have you done to help them? What have you sacrificed?" Silence fell across the battlefield. The architects, for all their power and judgment, had no answer. "Nothing," Thor continued, advancing on the lead architect. "You've done nothing. You watch and judge and preserve corpses, calling it virtue. But the Imperium fights. It bleeds. It makes terrible choices and lives with the consequences. Which is more moral, the observer who maintains purity by refusing to act, or the warrior who damns himself saving others? It's not that simple," the architect started. "It never is." Thor's lightning intensified, forming a storm that crackled across the entire plaza. "That's the point. You want to offer me simple choices, stay pure, or remain corrupted. But reality doesn't work that way. Every choice is complicated. Every action has costs. And sometimes the only moral option is to choose between degrees of horror and try to live with yourself afterward." The architect's form flickered, destabilizing under the assault of Thor's words as much as his power. "You have truly fallen. The noble Thor Odinson, who arrived in the Dark Realm, would never have spoken thus." "That Thor was a fool," Thor replied quietly. "A well-meaning fool who thought heroism was simple, that you could always save everyone if you just tried hard enough. He learned better. He learned that trying to be perfectly heroic gets people killed, and he's trying. Gods, he's trying to find a middle path between honor and pragmatism that doesn't destroy his soul completely." He lowered his lightning slightly. "I don't know if I'll succeed. I might become the monster Khorne wants. I might break completely under the weight. But I'll fail surrounded by warriors who understand the struggle, who fight the same battle every day. That's worth more than your sterile preservation." The lead architect studied Thor for a long moment, and something shifted in its ancient eyes. Not acceptance, but perhaps understanding. "You speak of finding a middle path," it said slowly. "Of maintaining humanity while wielding inhumanity. It is a noble goal, if impossible. The Dark Realm has destroyed every being who has attempted it." "Then I'll be the first to succeed," Thor declared. "Or I'll die trying. Either way, it's my choice." The architect raised its hand and reality rippled. The other architects ceased their combat, withdrawing to observe once more. "Very well. We cannot stop you from returning. Your companion's violence has proven that. But know this, Thor Odinson. We will continue to watch. And if you become the monster you fear, if you lose that humanity you cling to so desperately, we will intervene. We will end your existence before you can spread further corruption." "Fair enough," Thor replied. "One more thing." The architect gestured, and from the crystalline structures emerged something that made Thor's heart stop. Mjolnir. Not his Mjolnir. This one was different. Similar design, but crafted from materials that existed between dimensions. Its surface rippled like liquid mercury, and it hummed with power that resonated with Thor's lightning. "We cannot return your hammer. It exists in another reality entirely, and we have no passage to Asgard proper," the architect explained. "But we can offer this, a weapon forged from the echoes of your hammer, from the preserved memories of its creation. It is not bound by your father's enchantment. It will not judge your worthiness. It is simply a tool, one that will serve you in the dark realm if you choose to wield it." Thor approached the hammer slowly, half expecting a trick. His fingers closed around the handle, and power surged through him, not the same as Mjolnir, not that familiar, comfortable weight, but something new, something that responded to who he was now rather than who he'd been. "Why give me this?" Thor asked. "Because we were wrong," the architect admitted. "Not about the Dark Realm's corruption, that is real and terrible, but about the impossibility of resistance. You have changed, Thor Odinson. You've been scarred by horror and compromised by necessity. But you haven't broken. You've bent, adapted, found new strength in admitting your failures." It paused. "Perhaps there is hope for the Dark Realm after all. Not salvation, but the possibility that some warriors can maintain their humanity even while wielding darkness. We would see that experiment continue." Thor lifted the new hammer, feeling it balance perfectly in his grip. Lightning arced from his body into the weapon and back, forming a feedback loop of power. It was different from his father's Mjolnir, less refined but more adaptable. A weapon for a warrior who'd learned that perfection was impossible and adaptation was survival. "Thank you," Thor said simply. The architect nodded. "Go. Return to your war. We will watch, as we always do. And perhaps if you succeed where so many have failed, we will learn that observation is not enough, that sometimes judgment must give way to action." The Space Wolves regrouped, wounded but unbroken. Tech Priest Kraval had recorded everything, his manifold sensors drinking in data about the architects in their realm. Vasseur sheathed her power sword, her expression thoughtful. "This changes nothing," she said as they prepared to leave. "The Inquisition will want this realm investigated fully. We cannot allow potential threats." "Then you'll investigate without me," Thor interrupted. "I've seen what happens when the Imperium discovers something beyond its understanding. It either weaponizes it or destroys it. These architects aren't threats, they're observers. Leave them be." Vasseur studied him, then surprised everyone by nodding. "Your recommendation will be noted. Given your unique expertise with transdimensional phenomena, it carries weight." She almost smiled. "You're learning to play the Imperium's games, Thor. That's dangerous knowledge." "Everything in your galaxy is dangerous," Thor replied. "I'm just adapting." They returned to the Thunderhawk, but before Thor boarded, Sven grabbed his arm. "You could have stayed," Sven said quietly. "They offered you a way out. Return to who you were, lose the scars, forget the compromises. Why refuse?" Thor looked at his companion, this warrior who'd become a brother in blood and battle. "Because who I was couldn't survive in the 41st Millennium. Who I'm becoming might, and because..." He struggled for words. "Because you don't abandon pack brothers just because the fight gets hard. I learned that from the Space Wolves." Sven's scarred face split into a genuine smile. "You really are one of us now, for better or worse." "Mostly worse," Thor agreed, and they laughed, the dark humor of warriors who'd seen hell and chose to keep fighting anyway. The Thunderhawk lifted off, carrying them back toward the rift. As they passed through, reality screamed once more, and then they were back in the grim darkness of the 41st Millennium. The Gehenna system's polluted skies, the distant sound of astropathic screams, the ever-present sense that the galaxy was dying by inches. It should have felt oppressive after the sanctum's beauty. Instead, it felt like home. "The rift is destabilizing," Craval reported. "Collapsing. The architects are sealing it from their side." Thor watched through the viewport as his last connection to the realms beyond the Imperium vanished. No passage to Asgard, no escape from this nightmare. Just endless war stretching into a future measured in millennia of suffering. He should have felt despair. Instead, he felt purpose. "Set course for Valhalla Sector," Bjorn commanded. "The war there isn't finished, and we've been away too long. The guard will need reinforcement." Thor gripped his new hammer, feeling its weight settle into his grip. Not Mjolnir, not his father's judgment, just a tool for a warrior who'd learned that surviving in hell required accepting you couldn't leave it unchanged. "One more battle then," Thor said. Sven laughed. "Brother, there's always one more battle, until there isn't." And that was truth. Brutal, honest, perfectly summarizing the 41st Millennium's philosophy. You fought until you died, and then someone else fought in your place, forever, because the alternative was extinction. Thunder rumbled through the Frostfang as they entered the warp, and Thor Odinson, no longer the hero he'd been, not yet the monster he feared becoming, but something new and uncertain in between, prepared for the next war. The storm was eternal, but so was his refusal to stop fighting. The return to Valhalla Sector revealed the true scope of Imperial warfare. In the 2 months Thor had been away, time that moved strangely in the warp, the conflict had metastasized. The World Eaters had returned in force, having harvested slave populations from 3 nearby systems to replenish their warbands. 5 billion Imperial Guard now held lines across 7 worlds, and the casualty reports averaged 200 million per week. It was barely holding, but it was holding. "Welcome back, Stormwalker," Lord General Kozlov greeted Thor via hololith, and the man had aged decades in 2 months. "Your timing is fortunate. Karn the Betrayer leads an assault on Valhalla Secundus. Without intervention, the world falls within 3 days." "Then we intervene," Thor replied, but his voice carried a hardness that hadn't been there before. He'd learned to speak the Imperium's language fluently now, objectives, casualties, acceptable losses. It disgusted him. He did it anyway. The drop to Valhalla Secundus was a descent into apocalypse. The entire northern hemisphere burned, turned into a ritual site where the World Eaters sacrificed millions to summon Khorne's favor. The southern hemisphere held, barely, defended by exhausted guard regiments who'd been fighting for 6 consecutive months. Private Mikkel was among them, Thor discovered with surprise. The young soldier had survived, his augmetic arm now covered in purity seals and prayers to the Emperor. He'd been promoted to sergeant, leading a platoon of equally young soldiers who looked at him with the same desperate faith Mikkel had once directed toward Thor. "Stormwalker," Mikkel's face lit up despite the horror surrounding them. "You returned. The priest said you'd ascended to fight at the Emperor's side, but I knew you'd come back." Thor looked at this boy soldier who'd become a killer out of necessity, who'd lost his innocence but not his faith, who represented everything both beautiful and broken about the Imperium. "I keep my promises, Sergeant," Thor said. "Where is Khan?" Mikkel pointed toward the horizon where a cathedral fortress stood wreathed in fire and blood. "There, he's turned the Cardinal's throne into a monument to Khorne. Killed the Cardinal himself, tore him apart and built a throne from the bones. The World Eaters defend it with religious fervor." "Then we tear it down," Bjorn declared, his frost blade already drawing. "Thor, Sven's pack, you're with me." Direct assault. We kill Karn or die trying. It should have been suicide. Karn the Betrayer was legendary, a warrior who'd killed more people than some plagues, whose rage was so pure that even other world eaters feared him. He'd been betrayed by Erebus, left for dead, and returned stronger and more furious than before. But Thor had changed too, and his new hammer sang for blood. They fought through the cathedral's outer defenses, space wolves and lightning god, carving a path through world eaters who'd been killing for 10,000 years. Thor's new hammer, he'd taken to calling it Stormbringer, though it had no true name, channeled lightning with brutal efficiency. Each strike killed, and Thor felt nothing but grim satisfaction. He'd become efficient at murder. The realization should have horrified him more than it did. Karn waited in the cathedral's heart, seated upon his throne of bones, his armor slick with fresh blood. The betrayer was smaller than Thor expected, barely taller than a standard space marine, but his presence filled the chamber like physical pressure. "The Golden One returns," Karn said, his voice distorted by his helmet's vox grill. "I have killed 637 warriors today. Will you be 638? "I will be the one who sends you screaming back to the warp," Thor replied, and he meant it. No quips, no heroic declarations, just cold statement of intent. Karn laughed, a sound like meat tearing, and charged. The fight was everything the architects had feared Thor would become. No honor, no rules, just two killers testing which would break first. Karn's chain axe Gorechild, a weapon that had tasted the blood of Primarchs, met Stormbringer in a clash that shattered stone. Thor channeled lightning through the impact, trying to overload Karn's armor. The betrayer twisted, using the electrical discharge to propel himself into a spinning strike that opened Thor's side. Blood, still golden, still Asgardian, sprayed across ancient stone. Thor didn't slow. He slammed Stormbringer into Karn's helmet, caving in the front plate, channeled lightning directly into the crack, frying the betrayer's augmetics. Karn headbutted Thor, breaking the Asgardian's nose. Gorechild carved through Thor's armor, cutting muscle and cracking bone. They fought like beasts, sacrificing defense for offense, trading wounds that would have killed lesser beings. Around them, space wolves battled world eaters in similar savagery, the cathedral becoming an abattoir. "You fight well," Karn approved, his ruined helmet leaking blood. "Khorne will feast on your skull." "Khorne can starve," Thor roared back, and for the first time since losing Mjolnir, he felt it. The old fury, the righteous anger that had defined him as a hero. Not cold calculation, not pragmatic efficiency, just honest rage at the monsters who made this galaxy hell. He channeled that rage into lightning, into Stormbringer, into every fiber of his being. The storm he summoned wasn't tactical, wasn't controlled. It was raw expression of fury at a universe that demanded compromises and broke heroes and turned children into soldiers. Lightning filled the cathedral in a solid wall of electrical fury. Karn was caught in its center. His armor overloading, his augmetics frying, his flesh burning despite his enhanced physiology. And Thor held nothing back. He poured 10,000 years of frustration into that strike. Frustration at Loki's betrayals, at his father's expectations, at losing Jane, at failing to save Asgard, at being trapped in this nightmare galaxy, at losing Mjolnir, at the 70,000 who died because of his heroic choice, at everything. Karn's laughter cut through even that storm. "Yes, this is battle. This is truth." The betrayer surged forward through the lightning, Gorechild raised for a killing blow that would bisect Thor completely. Thor caught the chain axe on Stormbringer's haft. Lightning and blood mixed. For a frozen moment they were locked. Two warriors who'd each been broken by their respective paths, who'd each learned that surviving required becoming something monstrous. "We're not so different," Karn hissed. "Both of us killers, both of us using nobility to justify slaughter." "No," Thor replied, and meant it. "I hate what I've become. You embrace it. That's the difference." He twisted Stormbringer, redirecting Gorechild's momentum, and brought his hammer up in a perfect uppercut that caught Karn under the jaw. The betrayer's head snapped back with bone-breaking force. Thor followed with a lightning-charged strike to the chest that punched through ceramite armor and into the corrupted flesh beneath. Karn staggered, ichor pouring from the wound. For the first time in millennia, uncertainty flickered in his posture. "You actually hurt me," Karn said with something like respect. "No one has truly hurt me since Erebus's betrayal." He steadied himself, Gorechild raised in salute. "We will fight again, Stormwalker. Khorne demands it. You are worthy of his notice." "I refuse his notice," Thor declared. "I refuse his notice, his gifts, his entire philosophy. I will fight you as many times as necessary, and I will never accept that your blood god represents truth." Karn tilted his head, studying Thor through his ruined helmet. "You will. Eventually, the galaxy will grind you down until rage is all you have left. And when that day comes, you'll understand that Khorne offers freedom. The freedom to stop pretending your violence has noble purpose." Before Thor could respond, warp energy crackled around Karn. His World Eaters were teleporting him away, recognizing that their champion was genuinely in danger. "Until we meet again, Stormwalker," Karn's voice echoed as he vanished. "I look forward to the day you stop lying to yourself." The cathedral fell silent, save for the groans of the dying. Thor stood amid the carnage, Stormbringer dripping with blood and ichor, his body a patchwork of wounds that would take days to heal fully. He'd won. Driven off Karn, the betrayer himself, saved Valhalla Secundus, and he felt nothing but exhaustion. Bjorn approached, his own armor rent in a dozen places. "That was well fought, brother. You've come far from the idealistic warrior who first crashed on this continent." "Have I?" Thor asked quietly. "Or have I just become better at justifying necessary evils?" "Both," Bjorn replied with brutal honesty. "You've adapted to this galaxy's demands while maintaining enough of your principles to hate what you've become. That's the balance, Thor. That's what lets us keep fighting without becoming Karn." Sven joined them, carrying a wounded space wolf over his shoulders. "The World Eaters are in full retreat. Valhalla Secundus holds. The Guard is calling it a miracle." He grinned through his exhaustion. "They're already writing prayers to the Stormwalker who banished Karn." Thor looked out through the cathedral's shattered walls at the Guard positions below. He could see Sergeant Mikkel rallying his platoon, could see commissars executing cowards, could see Medicae working frantically to save soldiers whose wounds were mortal. Estimated casualties, 15 million guardsmen dead, 30 million wounded. Entire regiments shattered. By Imperial standards, a stunning victory. By Thor's original standards, an unforgivable catastrophe. By his current standards, necessary, horrible and traumatizing and wrong in every way that mattered, but necessary to prevent the World Eaters from using this world as a launching point for sector-wide slaughter. "I hate this," Thor said simply. "Good," Bjorn replied. "The day you stop hating it is the day you need to be put down like a rabid wolf. But hating it while doing it anyway? That's duty. That's what separates us from chaos." They returned to the Frostfang as heroes. The Imperial Guard cheered their passage, pressing forward to touch Thor's armor, as if his very presence conferred the Emperor's blessing. Sergeant Mikkel led the cheers, his augmetic arm raised in salute, tears streaming down his face. Thor accepted the adulation because refusing would break their faith. But inside, he felt the weight of every compromise, every calculated sacrifice, every time he'd chosen pragmatism over principles. He was changing, had changed, would continue changing until he either broke completely or found some equilibrium between the hero he'd been and the monster this galaxy demanded. And in the darkness of his quarters that night, Thor held Stormbringer and spoke to no one in particular. Perhaps to Odin, perhaps to the Emperor, perhaps to the universe itself. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I don't know if anyone is. But I'll keep fighting. I'll keep trying to find that middle path between honor and necessity. And if I fail, if I become the monster Khorne predicts, then I trust my brothers will end me before I cause more harm than good. Lightning crackled across Stormbringer, and Thor took it as acknowledgement. Not approval, not comfort, just acknowledgement that the struggle continued. Outside, the war machines of the Imperium prepared for the next deployment, the next battle, the next impossible choice. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But within that war, Thor Odinson fought to maintain his humanity. It was a losing battle, but it was his battle, and he would fight it until death or damnation claimed him. Months stretched into years, and Thor became a fixture of Valhalla Sector's defense. He fought alongside the Space Wolves in campaigns that would have broken lesser spirits, his name becoming legend among the Imperial Guard. The Stormwalker, the Thunder God who refused Khorne's gifts, the golden-haired warrior who stood between humanity and the darkness. But legends concealed truths, and the truth was that Thor Odinson was slowly being ground down by the Imperium's weight. Each battle required compromises. Each victory cost millions of lives. Each time he made the pragmatic choice over the heroic one, he felt another piece of his original self die. Stormbringer grew heavier with each swing, as if the hammer itself absorbed the weight of his sins. Yet he persisted, because the alternative, giving in to Khorne's rage, or the architect's offer of preserved purity, or simply breaking under the horror, would mean abandoning the warriors who'd stood beside him. Sven and his pack had become true brothers. Bjorn's gruff wisdom kept Thor anchored. Even Vasseur, with her cold pragmatism, had earned his respect through her genuine devotion to protecting humanity at any cost. The pivotal moment came during the siege of Infernus Gate, when a demon prince offered Thor a choice: save 1 billion civilians trapped behind enemy lines, or secure a strategic position that would end the war in this subsector, but doom those civilians to corruption and death. The old Thor would have attempted to save everyone. The corrupted Thor Khorne predicted would have chosen strategy without hesitation. Thor chose strategy, and spent 3 days afterward in his quarters, staring at his hands, trying to reconcile the warrior he was becoming with the hero he'd been. Bjorn found him there, breaking his isolation. "You made the right choice," the Wolf Lord said simply. "Did I?" Thor's voice was hollow. "1 billion souls, Bjorn. 1 billion people who trusted the Imperium to protect them. And I abandoned them to demons because it was tactically sound. Yes." Bjorn sat heavily beside him. "And if you tried to save them, 3 billion more would have died when the Demon Prince consolidated his position and launched his next offensive. Your choice saved 2 billion lives by condemning 1 billion. It was monstrous and necessary, and exactly what this galaxy demands from its warriors." "Then this galaxy is evil," Thor said flatly. "Yes," Bjorn agreed without hesitation, "but we're not. We're the ones who fight the evil while trying not to become it. We're the ones who make terrible choices and carry the weight. We're the ones who hate ourselves for what we've done, but do it anyway because someone must." He placed a massive hand on Thor's shoulder. "You haven't become Kharn, brother. Kharn feels no guilt. Kharn glories in slaughter. You feel every death, and that pain is what keeps you human." Thor looked at his friend, this warrior who'd fought for 4 centuries, who'd made choices that would haunt him until the Emperor himself returned, and understood. The struggle wasn't about avoiding compromise. It was about maintaining your humanity despite compromises, carrying the weight of your choices without letting it paralyze you, fighting the necessary battles while hating their necessity. It was impossible. But impossibility was the Imperium's specialty. "How long can we sustain this?" Thor asked. "How long before the weight breaks us?" "Until it does," Bjorn replied with grim humor. "And then we hope there are others to carry on after we fall. That's the only immortality that matters in the 41st Millennium, not living forever, but ensuring the fight continues beyond your death." In the following years, Thor embraced this philosophy fully. He became the Stormwalker in truth, a warrior who walked the line between heroism and pragmatism, who made terrible choices with eyes wide open, who saved what he could and mourned what he couldn't. His legend spread across Valhalla sector and beyond, carried by guard regiments who'd witnessed his fury, by space wolves who called him Battle Brother, by inquisitors who marked him as sanctioned asset rather than threat. But across the Imperium, the Chaos Gods watched with interest. Khorne, especially, for Thor represented something the Blood God craved, a warrior of immense power who teetered on corruption's edge, who'd learned rage and efficiency and violence, who was one terrible moment away from falling. The question wasn't if Thor would face that moment. In the 41st Millennium, everyone faced their breaking point eventually. The question was whether Thor Odinson, when that moment came, would remember why he fought, would remember the faces of warriors like Sergeant Mikkel, who needed heroes even if heroes were lies, would remember his pack brothers among the Space Wolves, who showed him that broken warriors could still protect what they loved, would remember the Architect's judgment and his refusal to accept their either-or choice, his insistence that he could forge his own path even in hell. And as Thor stood on the Frostfang's bridge, Stormbringer at his side, watching yet another war zone approach through the viewport, he made himself a promise. He would fight. He would compromise when necessary and hate himself for it. He would make the hard choices that saved billions by condemning millions. He would become the weapon this galaxy needed while clinging desperately to his humanity. And when the moment came, when he finally faced the choice between damnation and death, between Khorne's gifts and oblivion, he would choose neither. He would forge a third option through sheer stubbornness, because that's what Thor Odinson did. He defied. He persisted. He found ways forward when all paths seemed closed. It was arrogance, but arrogance tempered by hard-won humility. Pride that acknowledged its own flaws, strength that recognized its limits. Thunder rumbled through the ship as they entered the warp, and across the Vox channels orders were given for the next deployment. Another world burning. Another billion lives at stake. Another impossible situation requiring terrible choices. Thor gripped Stormbringer and felt the hammer's weight settle into his palm, heavier than Mjolnir had ever been, because Stormbringer carried no judgment of worthiness, only the accumulated weight of every choice Thor had made since losing his father's gift. "Ready?" Sven asked, checking his frost axe. "No," Thor admitted, "but that hasn't stopped me yet." Sven grinned. "That's the most honest thing I've ever heard you say." They descended into the next war zone together, and Thor Odinson, no longer the perfect hero, not yet the fallen monster, but something new and uncertain forged in the crucible of humanity's darkest age, continued his eternal war. He had lost his way home, lost his original worthiness, lost the certainty that had defined him for millennia. But he had found brothers in warriors who understood struggle, found purpose in protecting the innocent, even when protection meant making choices that would haunt him forever, found strength in acknowledging his failures while refusing to let them paralyze him. The Imperium would grind him down eventually. The Chaos Gods would tempt him eternally. The weight of his compromises would grow heavier with each passing year. But until that final breaking point, Thor Odinson would remain the Stormwalker, the god who learned humility, the hero who embraced necessary evil, the warrior who fought to maintain his humanity in a galaxy designed to destroy it. It was a legend worth forging, even if no one would remember it when the darkness finally claimed him, even if he himself forgot why he'd started fighting at all. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, the Stormwalker's thunder echoed still, a reminder that some warriors refused to break, that some heroes remembered why they fought, that even in hell the lightning still blazed. And across the warp, monitoring from their preserved realm, the architects watched. They had predicted Thor's fall, expected him to break within months. But years passed, and still he fought. Still he struggled. Still he maintained that impossible balance between monster and hero. Perhaps, the architects considered, they had been wrong. Not about the Dark Realm's corruption, that was undeniable, but about the inevitability of surrender. Perhaps in the crucible of horror, some warriors could be forged stronger, could learn to carry contradictions without breaking, could become something new that transcended the simple categories of hero or villain, corrupted or pure. It was an interesting hypothesis, worth monitoring. And so the architects continued their eternal observation, recording the Stormwalker's legend as they recorded all dying civilizations, with clinical detachment and perhaps the faintest hint of hope. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. More stories await.